The chase of Robin Hood. So Robin Hood and the others left the archery range at Finsbury Fields, and tarrying not, set forth straightway upon their homeward journey. It was well for them that they did so, for they had not gone more than 3 or 4 miles upon their way, when 6 of the yeomen of the king's guard came bustling among the crowd that still lingered, seeking for Robin and his men, to seize upon them and make them prisoners. Truly, it was an ill-done thing in the king to break his promise, but it all came about through the Bishop of Hereford's doing, for thus it happened. After the king left the archery ground, he went straightway to his cabinet, and with him went the Bishop of Hereford and Sir Robert Lee, but the king said never a word to these two, but sat gnawing his nether lip, for his heart was galled within him by what had happened. At last the Bishop of Hereford spoke, in a low, sorrowful voice. "It is a sad thing, your majesty, that this knavish outlaw should be let to escape in this wise, for let him but get back to Sherwood Forest safe and sound, and he may snap his fingers at king and king's men." At these words the king raised his eyes and looked grimly upon the bishop. "Sayst thou so?" quoth he. "Now I will show thee, in good time, how much thou dost err, for, when the 40 days are past and gone, I will seize upon this thieving outlaw, if I have to tear down all of Sherwood to find him. Thinkest thou that the laws of the King of England are to be so evaded by one poor knave without friends or money?" Then the bishop spoke again, in his soft, smooth voice. "Forgive my boldness, your majesty, and believe that I have naught but the good of England and your majesty's desirings at heart. But what would it boot though my gracious lord did root up every tree of Sherwood? Are there not other places for Robin Hood's hiding? Cannock Chase is not far from Sherwood, and the great forest of Arden is not far from Cannock Chase. Beside these are many other woodlands in Nottingham and Derby, Lincoln and York, amid any of which your majesty might as well think to seize upon Robin Hood as to lay finger upon a rat among the dust and broken things of a garret. Nay, my gracious lord, if he doth once plant foot in the woodland, he is lost to the law forever." At these words the king tapped his fingertips upon the table beside him with vexation. "What wouldst thou have me do, bishop?" quoth he. "Didst thou not hear me pledge my word to the queen? Thy talk is as barren as the wind from the bellows upon dead coals." "Far be it from me," said the cunning bishop, "to point the way to one so clear-sighted as your majesty, but were I the king of England, I should look upon the matter in this wise. I have promised my queen, let us say, that for 40 days the cunningest rogue in all England shall have freedom to come and go. But lo, I find this outlaw in my grasp. Shall I, then, foolishly cling to a promise so hastily given? Suppose that I had promised to do her majesty's bidding, whereupon she bade me to slay myself. Should I, then, shut mine eyes and run blindly upon my sword? Thus would I argue within myself. Moreover, I would say unto myself, a woman knoweth not of the great things appertaining to state government, and likewise I know a woman is ever prone to take up a fancy, even as she would pluck a daisy from the roadside, and then throw it away when the savour is gone. Therefore, though she hath taken a fancy to this outlaw, it will soon wane away and be forgotten. As for me, I have the greatest villain in all England in my grasp. Shall I, then, open my hand and let him slip betwixt my fingers? Thus, your majesty, would I say to myself, were I the king of England." So the bishop talked, and the king lent his ear to his evil counsel, until, after a while, he turned to Sir Robert Lee and bade him send 6 of the yeomen of the guard to take Robin Hood and his 3 men prisoners. Now Sir Robert Lee was a gentle and noble knight, and he felt grieved to the heart to see the king so break his promise. Nevertheless, he said nothing, for he saw how bitterly the king was set against Robin Hood, but he did not send the yeomen of the guard at once, but went first to the queen, and told her all that had passed, and bade her send word to Robin of his danger. This he did not for the well-being of Robin Hood, but because he would save his lord's honor if he could. Thus it came about that when, after a while, the yeomen of the guard went to the archery field, they found not Robin and the others, and so got no cakes at that fair. The afternoon was already well nigh gone when Robin Hood, Little John, Will, and Allen set forth upon their homeward way, trudging along merrily through the yellow slanting light, which speedily changed to rosy red as the sun sank low in the heavens. The shadows grew long, and finally merged into the grayness of the mellow twilight. The dusty highway lay all white betwixt the dark hedgerows, and along it walked 4 fellows like 4 shadows, the pad of their feet sounding loud, and their voices, as they talked, ringing clear upon the silence of the air. The great round moon was floating breathlessly up in the eastern sky when they saw before them the twinkling lights of Barnet town, some 10 or 12 miles from London. Down they walked through the stony streets and past the cozy houses with overhanging gables, before the doors of which sat the burghers and craftsmen in the mellow moonlight with their families about them, and so came at last on the other side of the hamlet to a little inn, all shaded with roses and woodbines. Before this inn Robin Hood stopped, for the spot pleased him well. Quoth he, "Here will we take up our inn and rest for the night, for we are well away from London town and our king's wrath. Moreover, if I mistake not, we will find sweet faring within. What say ye, lads?" "In sooth, good master," quoth Little John, "thy bidding and my doing ever fit together like cakes and ale. Let us in, I say also." Then up spake Will Scarlet, "I am ever ready to do what thou sayest, uncle, yet I could wish that we were farther upon our way ere we rest for the night. Nevertheless, if thou thinkest best, let us in for the night, say I also." So in they went, and called for the best that the place afforded. Then a right good feast was set before them, with 2 stout bottles of old sack to wash it down withal. These things were served by as plump and buxom a lass as you could find in all the land, so that Little John, who always had an eye for a fair lass, even when meat and drink were by, stuck his arms akimbo and fixed his eyes upon her, winking sweetly whenever he saw her looking toward him. Then you should have seen how the lass twittered with laughter, and how she looked at Little John out of the corners of her eyes, a dimple coming in either cheek. For the fellow had always a taking way with the women folk. So the feast passed merrily, and never had that inn seen such lusty feeders as these 4 stout fellows. But at last they were done their eating, though it seemed as though they never would have ended, and sat loitering over the sack. As they so sat, the landlord came in of a sudden and said that there was one at the door, a certain young esquire, Richard Partington, of the Queen's household, who wished to see the lad in blue and speak with him without loss of time. So Robin arose quickly, and, bidding the landlord not to follow him, left the others gazing at one another, and wondering what was about to happen. When Robin came out of the inn, he found young Richard Partington sitting upon his horse in the white moonlight, awaiting his coming. "What news bearest thou, Sir Page?" said Robin. "I trust that it is not of an ill nature." "Why," said young Partington, "for the matter of that, it is ill eno. The king hath been bitterly stirred up against thee by that vile Bishop of Hereford. He sent to arrest thee at the archery butts at Finsbury Fields, but not finding thee there, he hath gathered together his armed men, 50 and more, and is sending them in haste along this very road to Sherwood, either to take thee on the way, or to prevent thy getting back to the woodlands again. He hath given the Bishop of Hereford command over all these men, and thou knowest what thou hast to expect of the Bishop of Hereford short shrift and a long rope. 2 bands of horsemen are already upon the road, not far behind me, so thou hadst best get thee gone from this place straightway, for, if thou tarriest longer, thou art like to sleep this night in a cold dungeon. This word the Queen hath bidden me bring to thee." "Now, Richard Partington," quoth Robin, "this is the 2nd time that thou hast saved my life, and if the proper time ever cometh I will show thee that Robin Hood never forgets these things. As for that Bishop of Hereford, if I ever catch him nigh to Sherwood again, things will be like to go ill with him. Thou mayst tell the good Queen that I will leave this place without delay, and will let the landlord think that we are going to St. Albans. But when we are upon the highroad again, I will go one way through the country and will send my men the other, so that if one falleth into the king's hands the others may haply escape. We will go by devious ways, and so, I hope, will reach Sherwood in safety. And now, Sir Page, I wish thee farewell." "Farewell, thou bold yeoman," said young Partington, "and mayst thou reach thy hiding in safety." So each shook the other's hand, and the lad, turning his horse's head, rode back toward London, while Robin entered the inn once more. There he found his yeomen sitting in silence, waiting his coming. Likewise the landlord was there, for he was curious to know what Master Partington had to do with the fellow in blue. "Up, my merry men," quoth Robin, "this is no place for us, for those are after us with whom we will stand but an ill chance and we fall into their hands. So we will go forward once more, nor will we stop this night till we reach St. Albans." Hereupon, taking out his purse, he paid the landlord his score, and so they left the inn. When they had come to the highroad without the town, Robin stopped and told them all that had passed between young Partington and himself, and how that the king's men were after them with hot heels. Then he told them that here they should part company, they three going to the eastward and he to the westward, and so, skirting the main highroads, would come by devious paths to Sherwood. So, be ye wily, said Robin Hood, and keep well away from the northward roads till ye have gotten well to the eastward. And thou, Will Scarlet, take the lead of the others, for thou hast a cunning turn to thy wits. Then Robin kissed the three upon the cheeks, and they kissed him, and so they parted company. Not long after this, a score or more of the king's men came clattering up to the door of the inn at Barnet Town. Here they leaped from their horses and quickly surrounded the place, the leader of the band and 4 others entering the room where the yeoman had been. But they found that their birds had flown again, and that the king had been balked a second time. Methought that they were naughty fellows, said the host, when he heard whom the men-at-arms sought. But I heard that blue-clad knave say that they would go straight forward to St. Albans. So, an ye hurry forward, ye may, perchance, catch them on the highroad betwixt here and there. For this news the leader of the band thanked mine host right heartily, and calling his men together, mounted and set forth again, galloping forward to St. Albans upon a wild goose chase. After Little John and Will Scarlet and Allan a Dale had left the highway near Garnet, they travelled toward the eastward, without stopping, as long as their legs could carry them, until they came to Chelmsford in Essex. Thence they turned northward, and came through Cambridge and Lincolnshire, to the good town of Gainsborough. Then, striking to the westward and the south, they came at last to the northern borders of Sherwood Forest, without in all that time having met so much as a single band of the king's men. 8 days they journeyed thus ere they reached the woodlands in safety, but when they got to the greenwood glade, they found that Robin had not yet returned. For Robin was not as lucky in getting back as his men had been, as you shall presently hear. After having left the great northern road, he turned his face to the westward, and so came past Aylesbury to fair Woodstock in Oxfordshire. Thence he turned his footsteps northward, travelling for a great distance by way of Warwick town, till he came to Dudley in Staffordshire. 7 days it took him to journey thus far, and then he thought he had gotten far enough to the north, so, turning toward the eastward, shunning the main roads and choosing byways and grassy lanes, he went, by way of Lichfield and Ashby de la Zouch, toward Sherwood, until he came to a place called Stanton. And now Robin's heart began to laugh aloud, for he thought that his danger had gone by, and that his nostrils would soon snuff the spicy air of the woodlands once again. But there is many a slip betwixt the cup and the lip, and this Robin was to find. For thus it was. When the king's men found themselves foiled at St. Albans, and that Robin and his men were not to be found high nor low, they knew not what to do. Presently another band of horsemen came, and another, until all the moonlit streets were full of armed men. Betwixt midnight and dawn another band came to the town, and with them came the Bishop of Hereford. When he heard that Robin Hood had once more slipped out of the trap, he stayed not a minute, but, gathering his bands together, he pushed forward to the northward with speed, leaving orders for all the troops that came to St. Albans to follow after him without tarrying. On the evening of the 4th day, he reached Nottingham town, and there straightway divided his men into bands of 6 or 7, and sent them all through the countryside, blocking every highway and byway to the eastward, and the southward, and the westward of Sherwood. The Sheriff of Nottingham called forth all his men likewise, and joined with the bishop, for he saw that this was the best chance that had ever befallen of paying back his score in full to Robin Hood. Will Scarlet and Little John and Allan, a Dale had just missed the king's men to the eastward, for the very next day after they had passed the line and entered Sherwood the roads through which they had travelled were blocked, so that, had they tarried in their journeying, they would surely have fallen into the bishop's hands. But of all this Robin knew not a whit, so he whistled merrily as he trudged along the road beyond Stanton, with his heart as free from care as the yolk of an egg is from cobwebs. At last he came to where a little stream spread across the road in a shallow sheet, tinkling and sparkling as it fretted over its bed of golden gravel. Here Robin stopped, being athirst, and kneeling down, he made a cup of the palms of his hands and began to drink. On either side of the road, for a long distance, stood tangled thickets of bushes and young trees, and it pleased Robin's heart to hear the little birds singing therein, for it made him think of Sherwood, and it seemed as though it had been a lifetime since he had breathed the air of the woodlands. But of a sudden, as he thus stooped, drinking, something hissed past his ear, and struck with a splash into the gravel and water beside him. Quick as a wink, Robin sprang to his feet, and at one bound, crossed the stream and the roadside, and plunged headlong into the thicket without looking around. For he knew right well that that which had hissed so venomously beside his ear was a gray goose shaft, and that to Tari so much as a moment meant death. Even as he leaped into the thicket, 6 more arrows rattled among the branches after him, one of which pierced his doublet, and would have struck deeply into his side, but for the tough coat of steel that he wore. Then up the road came riding some of the king's men at headlong speed. They leaped from their horses and plunged straightway into the thicket after Robin. But Robin knew the ground better than they did, so crawling here, stooping there, and anon running across some little open, he soon left them far behind, coming out, at last, upon another road about 800 paces distant from the one he had left. Here he stood for a moment, listening to the distant shouts of the 7 men as they beat up and down in the thickets like hounds that had lost the scent of the quarry. Then, buckling his belt more tightly around his waist, he ran fleetly down the road toward the eastward and Sherwood. But Robin had not gone more than 3 furlongs in that direction when he came suddenly to the brow of a hill, and saw beneath him another band of the king's men seated in the shade along the roadside in the valley beneath. Then he paused not a moment, but seeing that they had not caught sight of him, he turned and ran back whence he had come, knowing that it was better to run the chance of escaping those fellows that were yet in the thickets than to rush into the arms of those in the valley. So back he ran with all speed and had gotten safely past the thickets when the 7 men came forth into the open road. They raised a great shout when they saw him, such as the hunter gives when the deer breaks cover, but Robin was then 1/4 of a mile and more away from them, coursing over the ground like a greyhound. He never slackened his pace, but ran along, mile after mile, till he had come nigh to Mackworth, over beyond the Derwent River, nigh to Derby town. Here, seeing that he was out of present danger, he slackened in his running, and at last sat him down beneath a hedge where the grass was the longest and the shade the coolest, there to rest and catch his wind. "By my soul, Robin," quoth he to himself, "that was the narrowest miss that e'er thou hadst in all thy life. I do say most solemnly that the feather of that wicked shaft tickled mine ear as it whizzed past. This same running hath given me a most craving appetite for victuals and drink. Now I pray St. Dunstan that he send me speedily some meat and beer." It seemed as though St. Dunstan was like to answer his prayer, for along the road came plodding a certain cobbler, one Quince of Derby, who had been to take a pair of shoes to a farmer nigh Kirk Langley, and was now coming back home again, with a fair boiled capon in his pouch and a stout pottle of beer by his side, which same the farmer had given him for joy of such a stout pair of shoon. Good Quince was an honest fellow, but his wits were somewhat of the heavy sort, like unbaked dough, so that the only thing that was in his mind was, 3 shillings 6pence halfpenny for thy shoon, good Quince 3 shillings 6pence halfpenny for thy shoon. And this travelled round and round inside of his head, without another thought getting into his noddle, as a pea rolls round and round inside an empty quart pot. "Halloa, good friend," quoth Robin from beneath the hedge when the other had got nigh enough, "whither away so merrily this bright day?" Hearing himself so called upon, the cobbler stopped, and seeing a well-clad stranger in blue, he spoke to him in seemly wise. "Give ye good den, fair sir, and I would say that I come from Kirk Langley, where I sold my shoon and got 3 shillings 6pence halfpenny for them in as sweet money as ever thou sawst, and honestly earned too, I would thee know. But an I may be so bold, thou pretty fellow, what dost thou there beneath the hedge?" "Marry," quoth merry Robin, "I sit beneath the hedge here to drop salt on the tails of golden birds. But in sooth thou art the first chick of any worth I seen this blessed day." At these words the cobbler's eyes opened big and wide, and his mouth grew round with wonder, like a knot-hole in a board fence. "Slack-a-day," quoth he, "look ye now, I never seen those same golden birds. And dost thou in sooth find them in these hedges, good fellow? Prithee, tell me, are there many of them? I would fain find them mine own self." "Ay, truly," quoth Robin, "they are as thick here as fresh herring in Cannock Chase." "Look ye now," said the cobbler, all drowned in wonder, "and dost thou in sooth catch them by dropping salt on their pretty tails?" "Yea," quoth Robin, "but this salt is of an odd kind, let me tell thee, for it can only be gotten by boiling down a quart of moonbeams in a wooden platter, and then one hath but a pinch. But tell me, now, thou witty man, what hast thou gotten there in that pouch by thy side, and in that pottle?" At these words the cobbler looked down at those things of which merry Robin spoke, for the thoughts of the golden bird had driven them from his mind, and it took him some time to scrape the memory of them back again. "Why," said he at last, "in the one is good March beer, and in the other is a fat capon. Truly, Quince the cobbler will ha a fine feast this day, and I mistake not." "But tell me, good Quince," said Robin, "hast thou a mind to sell those things to me? For the hearing of them sounds sweet in mine ears. I will give thee these gay clothes of blue that I have upon my body, and 10 shillings to boot for thy clothes, and thy leather apron, and thy beer, and thy capon. What sayst thou, bully boy?" "Nay, thou dost jest with me," said the cobbler, "for my clothes are coarse and patched, and thine are of fine stuff and very pretty." "Never a jest do I speak," quoth Robin. "Come, strip thy jacket off, and I will show thee, for I tell thee I like thy clothes well. Moreover, I will be kind to thee, for I will feast straightway upon the good things thou hast with thee, and thou shalt be bidden to the eating." At these words he began slipping off his doublet, and the cobbler, seeing him so in earnest, began pulling off his clothes also, for Robin Hood's garb tickled his eye. So each put on the other fellow's clothes, and Robin gave the honest cobbler 10 bright new shillings. Quoth merry Robin, "I ha been a many things in my life before, but never have I been an honest cobbler. Come, friend, let us fall to and eat, for something within me cackles aloud for that good fat capon." So both sat down and began to feast right lustily, so that when they were done the bones of the capon were picked as bare as charity. Then Robin stretched his legs out with a sweet feeling of comfort within him. Quoth he, "By the turn of thy voice, good Quince, I know that thou hast a fair song or two running loose in thy head like colts in a meadow. I prithee, turn one of them out for me." "A song or two I ha," quoth the cobbler, poor things, but such as they are thou art welcome to one of them." So, moistening his throat with a swallow of beer, he sang, "Of all the joys, the best I love, sing hey my frisking Nan, oh, and that which most my soul doth move, it is the clinking can, oh. All other bliss I'd throw away, sing hey my frisking Nan, oh, but this." The stout cobbler got no further in his song, for of a sudden 6 horsemen burst upon them where they sat, and seized roughly upon the honest craftsman, hauling him to his feet, and nearly plucking the clothes from him as they did so. "Ha!" roared the leader of the band in a great big voice of joy. "Have we then caught thee at last, thou blue-clad knave? Now blessed be the name of St. Hubert, for we are 80 pounds richer this minute than we were before, for the good Bishop of Hereford hath promised that much to the band that shall bring thee to him. Oho, thou cunning rascal, thou wouldst look so innocent, forsooth. We know thee, thou old fox. But off thou goest with us to have thy brush clipped forthwith." At these words, the poor cobbler gazed all around him with his great blue eyes as round as those of a dead fish, while his mouth gaped as though he had swallowed all his words, and so lost his speech. Robin also gaped and stared in a wondering way, just as the cobbler would have done in his place. "Alack-a-daisy me," quoth he, "I know not whether I be sitting here or in no man's land. What meaneth all this stir pot, dear good gentleman? Surely this is a sweet, honest fellow." "Honest fellow, sayst thou, clown?" quoth one of the men. "Why, I tell thee that this is that same rogue that men call Robin Hood." At this speech the cobbler stared and gaped more than ever, for there was such a thrashing of thoughts going on within his poor head that his wits were all befogged with the dust and chaff thereof. Moreover, as he looked at Robin Hood, and saw the yeoman look so like what he knew himself to be, he began to doubt, and to think that mayhap he was the great outlaw in real sooth. Said he in a slow, wondering voice, "Am I in very truth that fellow? Now I had thought, but nay, Quince, thou art mistook, yet am I, nay, I must indeed be Robin Hood. Yet, truly, I had never thought to pass from an honest craftsman to such a great yeoman." "Alas," quoth Robin Hood, "look ye there now, see how your ill treatment hath curdled the wits of this poor lad and turned them all sour. I myself am Quince, the cobbler of Derby town." "Is it so?" said Quince. "Then, indeed, I am somebody else, and can be none other than Robin Hood. Take me, fellows, but let me tell you that ye ha laid hand upon the stoutest yeoman that ever trod the woodlands." "Thou wilt play madman, wilt thou?" said the leader of the band. "Here, Giles, fetch a cord and bind this knave's hands behind him. I warrant we will bring his wits back to him again when we get him safe before our good bishop at Tutbury town." Thereupon they tied the cobbler's hands behind him and led him off with a rope, as the farmer leads off the calf he hath brought from the fair. Robin stood looking after them, and when they were gone he laughed till the tears rolled down his cheeks, for he knew that no harm would befall the honest fellow, and he pictured to himself the bishop's face when good Quince was brought before him as Robin Hood. Then, turning his steps once more to the eastward, he stepped out right foot foremost toward Nottinghamshire and Sherwood Forest. But Robin Hood had gone through more than he wotted of. His journey from London had been hard and long, and in a se'nnight he had travelled 70 and more of miles. He thought now to travel on without stopping until he had come to Sherwood, but ere he had gone 50 of miles, he felt his strength giving way beneath him like a river bank which the waters have undermined. He sat him down and rested, but he knew within himself that he could go no farther that day, for his feet felt like lumps of lead, so heavy were they with weariness. Once more he arose and went forward, but after travelling a couple of miles he was fain to give the matter up, so, coming to an inn just then, he entered and calling the landlord, bade him show him to a room, although the sun was only then just sinking in the western sky. There were but 3 bedrooms in the place, and to the meanest of these the landlord showed Robin Hood, but little Robin cared for the looks of the place, for he could have slept that night upon a bed of broken stones. So, stripping off his clothes without more ado, he rolled into the bed and was asleep almost ere his head touched the pillow. Not long after Robin had so gone to his rest, a great cloud peeped blackly over the hills to the westward. Higher and higher it arose until it piled up into the night like a mountain of darkness. All around beneath it came ever and anon a dull red flash, and presently a short grim mutter of the coming thunder was heard. Then up rode 4 stout burghers of Nottingham town, for this was the only inn within 5 miles distance, and they did not care to be caught in such a thunderstorm as this that was coming upon them. Leaving their nags to the stableman, they entered the best room of the inn, where fresh green rushes lay all spread upon the floor, and there called for the goodliest fare that the place afforded. After having eaten heartily, they bade the landlord show them to their rooms, for they were hoary, having ridden all the way from Dronfield that day. So off they went, grumbling at having to sleep 2 in a bed, but their troubles on this score, as well as all others, were soon lost in the quietness of sleep. And now came the first gust of wind, rushing past the place, clapping and banging the doors and shutters, smelling of the coming rain, and all wrapped in a cloud of dust and leaves. As though the wind had brought a guest along with it, the door opened of a sudden and in came a friar of Emmet Priory, and one in high degree, as was shown by the softness and sleekness of his robes and the richness of his rosary. He called to the landlord, and bade him first have his mule well fed and bedded in the stable, and then to bring him the very best there was in the house. So presently a savory stew of tripe and onions, with sweet little fat dumplings, was set before him, likewise a good stout pottle of Malmsey. And straightway the holy friar fell to with great courage and heartiness, so that in a short time naught was left but a little pool of gravy in the centre of the platter, not large enow to keep the life in a starving mouse. In the meantime the storm broke. Another gust of wind went rushing by, and with it fell a few heavy drops of rain, which presently came rattling down in showers, beating against the casements like 100 little hands. Bright flashes of lightning lit up every raindrop, and with them came cracks of thunder that went away rumbling and bumping, as though saints within were busy rolling great casks of water across rough ground overhead. The women folks screamed, and the merry wags in the taproom put their arms around their waists to soothe them into quietness. At last the holy friar bade the landlord show him to his room, but when he heard that he was to bed with a cobbler, he was as ill-contented a fellow as you could find in all England. Nevertheless there was nothing for it, and he must sleep there or nowhere. So, taking up his candle, he went off, grumbling like the now distant thunder. When he came to the room where he was to sleep, he held the light over Robin and looked at him from top to toe. Then he felt better pleased, for instead of a rough, dirty-bearded fellow, he beheld as fresh and clean a lad as one could find in a week of Sundays. So, slipping off his clothes, he also huddled into the bed, where Robin, grunting and grumbling in his sleep, made room for him. Robin was more sound asleep, I wot, than he had been for many a day, else he would never have rested so quietly with one of the friar's sort so close beside him. As for the friar, had he known who Robin Hood was, you may well believe he would almost as soon have slept with an adder as with the man he had for a bedfellow. So the night passed comfortably enough, but at the first dawn of day, Robin opened his eyes and turned his head upon the pillow. Then how he gaped and how he stared, for there beside him lay one all shaven and shorn, so that he knew that it must be a fellow in holy orders. He pinched himself sharply, but finding he was awake, sat up in bed, while the other slumbered as peacefully as though he were safe and sound at home in Emmet Priory. Now, quoth Robin to himself, I wonder how this thing hath dropped into my bed during the night. So saying, he arose softly, so as not to waken the other, and looking about the room he espied the friar's clothes lying upon a bench near the wall. First he looked at the clothes, with his head on one side, and then he looked at the friar and slowly winked one eye. Quoth he, Good brother, whate'er thy name may be, as thou hast borrowed my bed so freely, I'll e'en borrow thy clothes in return. So saying, he straightway donned the holy man's garb, but kindly left the cobbler's clothes in the place of it. Then he went forth into the freshness of the morning, and the stableman that was up and about the stables opened his eyes as though he saw a green mouse before him, for such men as the friars of Emmet were not wont to be early risers. But the man bottled his thoughts, and only asked Robin whether he wanted his mule brought from the stable. Yea, my son, quoth Robin, albeit he knew not of the mule, and bring it forth quickly, I prithee, for I am late and must be jogging. So presently the stableman brought forth the mule, and Robin mounted it and went on his way rejoicing. As for the holy friar, when he arose he was in as pretty a stew as any man in all the world. For his rich, soft robes were gone, likewise his purse with 10 golden pounds in it, and naught was left but patched clothes and a leathern apron. He raged and swore like any layman, but as his swearing mended nothing and the landlord could not aid him, and as, moreover, he was forced to be at Emmet Priory that very morning upon matters of business, he was fain either to don the cobbler's clothes or travel the road in nakedness. So he put on the clothes, and still raging and swearing vengeance against all the cobblers in Derbyshire, he set forth upon his way afoot. But his ills had not yet done with him, for he had not gone far ere he fell into the hands of the king's men, who marched him off, willy-nilly, to Tutbury town and the Bishop of Hereford. In vain he swore he was a holy man, and showed his shaven crown. Off he must go, for nothing would do but that he was Robin Hood. Meanwhile merry Robin rode along contentedly, passing safely by 2 bands of the king's men, until his heart began to dance within him because of the nearness of Sherwood. So he travelled ever on to the eastward, till of a sudden he met a noble knight in a shady lane. Then Robin checked his mule quickly and leaped from off its back. Now, well met, Sir Richard of the Lea, cried he, for rather than any other man in England would I see thy good face this day. Then he told Sir Richard all the happenings that had befallen him, and that now at last he felt himself safe, being so nigh to Sherwood again. But when Robin had done, Sir Richard shook his head sadly. Thou art in greater danger now, Robin, than thou hast yet been, said he, for before thee lie bands of the sheriff's men blocking every road and letting none pass through the lines without examining them closely. I myself know this, having passed them but now. Before thee lie the sheriff's men and behind thee the king's men, and thou canst not hope to pass either way, for by this time they will know of thy disguise and will be in waiting to seize upon thee. My castle and everything within it are thine, but naught could be gained there, for I could not hope to hold it against such a force as is now in Nottingham of the king's and the sheriff's men. Having so spoken, Sir Richard bent his head in thought, and Robin felt his heart sink within him like that of the fox that hears the hounds at his heels and finds his den blocked with earth so that there is no hiding for him. But presently Sir Richard spoke again, saying, One thing thou canst do, Robin, and one only. Go back to London and throw thyself upon the mercy of our good Queen Eleanor. Come with me straightway to my castle. Doff these clothes and put on such as my retainers wear. Then I will hie me to London town with a troop of men behind me, and thou shalt mingle with them, and thus will I bring thee to where thou mayst see and speak with the Queen. Thy only hope is to get to Sherwood, for there none can reach thee, and thou wilt never get to Sherwood but in this way. So Robin went with Sir Richard of the Lea, and did as he said, for he saw the wisdom of that which the knight advised, and that this was his only chance of safety. Queen Eleanor walked in her royal garden, amid the roses that bloomed sweetly, and with her walked 6 of her ladies-in-waiting, chattering blithely together. Of a sudden a man leaped up to the top of the wall from the other side, and then, hanging for a moment, dropped lightly upon the grass within. All the ladies-in-waiting shrieked at the suddenness of his coming, but the man ran to the queen and kneeled at her feet, and she saw that it was Robin Hood. "Why, how now, Robin?" cried she. "Dost thou dare to come into the very jaws of the raging lion? Alas, poor fellow, thou art lost indeed if the king finds thee here. Dost thou not know that he is seeking thee through all the land?" "Yea," quoth Robin, "I do know right well that the king seeks me, and therefore I have come. For surely no ill can befall me when he hath pledged his royal word to your majesty for my safety. Moreover, I know your majesty's kindness and gentleness of heart, and so I lay my life freely in your gracious hands." "I take thy meaning, Robin Hood," said the queen, "and that thou dost convey reproach to me as well thou mayst, for I know that I have not done by thee as I ought to have done. I know right well that thou must have been hard pressed by peril to leap so boldly into one danger to escape another. Once more I promise thee mine aid, and will do all I can to send thee back in safety to Sherwood Forest. Bide thou here till I return." So saying, she left Robin in the garden of roses and was gone a long time. When she came back, Sir Robert Lee was with her, and the queen's cheeks were hot and the queen's eyes were bright, as though she had been talking with high words. Then Sir Robert came straight forward to where Robin Hood stood, and he spoke to the yeoman in a cold, stern voice. Quoth he, "Our gracious sovereign the king hath mitigated his wrath toward thee, fellow, and hath once more promised that thou shalt depart in peace and safety. Not only hath he promised this, but in 3 days he will send one of his pages to go with thee and see that none arrest thy journey back again. Thou mayst thank thy patron saint that thou hast such a good friend in our noble queen, for, but for her persuasion and arguments, thou hadst been a dead man, I can tell thee. Let this peril that thou hast passed through teach thee 2 lessons. First, be more honest. Second, be not so bold in thy comings and goings. A man that walketh in the darkness as thou dost may escape for a time, but in the end he will surely fall into the pit. Thou hast put thy head in the angry lion's mouth, and yet thou hast escaped by a miracle. Try it not again." So saying, he turned and left Robin and was gone. For 3 days Robin abided in London in the queen's household, and at the end of that time the king's head page, Edward Cunningham, came, and taking Robin with him, departed northward upon his way to Sherwood. Now and then they passed bands of the king's men coming back again to London, but none of those bands stopped them, and so, at last, they reached the sweet, leafy woodlands. Robin Hood and Guy of Gisbourne. A long time passed after the great shooting match, and during that time Robin followed one part of the advice of Sir Robert Lee, to wit, that of being less bold in his comings and his goings. For though mayhap he may not have been more honest, as most folks regard honesty, he took good care not to travel so far from Sherwood that he could not reach it both easily and quickly. Great changes had fallen in this time, for King Henry had died and King Richard had come to the crown that fitted him so well through many hard trials, and through adventures as stirring as any that ever befell Robin Hood. But though great changes came, they did not reach to Sherwood's shades, for there Robin Hood and his men dwelled as merrily as they had ever done, with hunting and feasting and singing and blithe woodland sports, for it was little the outside striving of the world troubled them. The dawning of a summer's day was fresh and bright, and the birds sang sweetly in a great tumult of sound. So loud was their singing that it awakened Robin Hood where he lay sleeping, so that he stirred and turned and arose. Up rose Little John also, and all the merry men then, after they had broken their fast, they set forth hither and thither upon the doings of the day. Robin Hood and Little John walked down a forest path where all around the leaves danced and twinkled as the breeze trembled through them, and the sunlight came flickering down. Quoth Robin Hood, "I make my vow, Little John, my blood tickles my veins as it flows through them this gay morn. What sayst thou to our seeking adventures, each one upon his own account?" "With all my heart," said Little John. "We have had more than one pleasant doing in that way, good master. Here are 2 paths. Take thou the one to the right hand, and I will take the one to the left, and then let us each walk straight ahead till he tumble into some merry doing or other." "I like thy plan," quoth Robin, "therefore we will part here. But look thee, Little John, keep thyself out of mischief, for I would not have ill befall thee for all the world." "Marry, come up," quoth Little John, "how thou talkest. Methinks thou art wont to get thyself into tighter coils than I am like to do." At this Robin Hood laughed. "Why, in sooth, Little John," said he, thou hast a blundering hard-headed way that seemeth to bring thee right side uppermost in all thy troubles, but let us see who cometh out best this day." So saying, he clapped his palm to Little John's, and each departed upon his way, the trees quickly shutting the one from the other's sight. Robin Hood strolled onward till he came to where a broad woodland road stretched before him. Overhead, the branches of the trees laced together in flickering foliage, all golden where it grew thin to the sunlight. Beneath his feet, the ground was soft and moist from the sheltering shade. Here in this pleasant spot the sharpest adventure that ever befell Robin Hood came upon him. For, as he walked down the woodland path thinking of naught but the songs of the birds, he came of a sudden to where a man was seated upon the mossy roots beneath the shade of a broad-spreading oak tree. Robin Hood saw that the stranger had not caught sight of him, so he stopped and stood quite still, looking at the other a long time before he came forward. And the stranger, I wot, was well worth looking at, for never had Robin seen a figure like that sitting beneath the tree. From his head to his feet he was clad in a horse's hide, dressed with the hair upon it. Upon his head was a cowl that hid his face from sight, and which was made of the horse's skin, the ears whereof stuck up like those of a rabbit. His body was clad in a jacket made of the hide, and his legs were covered with the hairy skin likewise. By his side was a heavy broadsword and a sharp, double-edged dagger. A quiver of smooth, round arrows hung across his shoulders, and his stout bow of yew leaned against the tree beside him. "Halloa, friend," cried Robin, coming forward at last. "Who art thou that sittest there? And what is that thou hast upon thy body? I make my vow I ha never seen such a sight in all my life before. Had I done an evil thing, or did my conscience trouble me, I would be afraid of thee, thinking that thou wast someone from down below bringing a message bidding me come straightway to King Nicholas." To this speech the other answered not a word, but he pushed the cowl back from his head and showed a knit brow, a hooked nose, and a pair of fierce, restless black eyes, which altogether made Robin think of a hawk as he looked on his face. But beside this there was something about the lines on the stranger's face, and his thin, cruel mouth, and the hard glare of his eyes that made one's flesh creep to look upon. "Who art thou, rascal?" said he at last, in a loud, harsh voice. "Tut, tut," quoth merry Robin, "speak not so sourly, brother. Hast thou fed upon vinegar and nettles this morning that thy speech is so stinging?" "And thou likest not my words," said the other fiercely. "Thou hadst best be jogging, for I tell thee plainly my deeds match them." "Nay, but I do like thy words, thou sweet, pretty thing," quoth Robin, squatting down upon the grass in front of the other. "Moreover, I tell thee thy speech is witty and gamesome as any I ever heard in all my life." The other said not a word, but he glared upon Robin with a wicked and baleful look, such as a fierce dog bestows upon a man ere it springs at his throat. Robin returned the gaze with one of wide-eyed innocence, not a shadow of a smile twinkling in his eyes or twitching at the corners of his mouth. So they sat staring at one another for a long time, until the stranger broke the silence suddenly. "What is thy name, fellow?" said he. "Now," quoth Robin, "I am right glad to hear thee speak, for I began to fear the sight of me had stricken thee dumb. As for my name, it may be this or it may be that, but methinks it is more meet for thee to tell me thine, seeing that thou art the greater stranger in these parts. Prithee, tell me, sweet chuck, why wearest thou that dainty garb upon thy pretty body?" At these words the other broke into a short, harsh roar of laughter. "By the bones of the demon Odin," said he, "thou art the boldest spoken man that ever I have seen in all my life. I know not why I do not smite thee down where thou sittest, for only 2 days ago I skewered a man over back of Nottingham town for saying not half so much to me as thou hast done. I wear this garb, thou fool, to keep my body warm, likewise it is near as good as a coat of steel against a common sword thrust. As for my name, I care not who knoweth it. It is Guy of Gisbourne, and thou mayst have heard it before. I come from the woodlands over in Herefordshire, upon the lands of the bishop of that ilk. I am an outlaw, and get my living by hook and by crook in a manner it boots not now to tell of. Not long since the bishop sent for me, and said that if I would do a certain thing that the Sheriff of Nottingham would ask of me, he would get me a free pardon, and give me 10 pounds to boot. So straightway I came to Nottingham town and found my sweet sheriff, and what thinkest thou he wanted of me? Why, forsooth, to come here to Sherwood to hunt up one Robin Hood, also an outlaw, and to take him alive or dead. It seemeth that they have no one here to face that bold fellow, and so sent all the way to Herefordshire. And to me, for thou knowest the old saying, set a thief to catch a thief. As for the slaying of this fellow, it galleth me not a whit, for I would shed the blood of my own brother for the half of 200 pounds. To all this Robin listened, and as he listened his gorge rose. Well he knew of this Guy of Gisbourne, and of all the bloody and murderous deeds that he had done in Herefordshire, for his doings were famous throughout all the land. Yet, although he loathed the very presence of the man, he held his peace, for he had an end to serve. Truly, quoth he, I have heard of thy gentle doings. Methinks there is no one in all the world that Robin Hood would rather meet than thee. At this Guy of Gisbourne gave another harsh laugh. Why, quoth he, it is a merry thing to think of one stout outlaw like Robin Hood meeting another stout outlaw like Guy of Gisbourne. Only in this case it will be an ill happening for Robin Hood, for the day he meets Guy of Gisbourne he shall die. But thou gentle, merry spirit, quoth Robin, dost thou not think that mayhap this same Robin Hood may be the better man of the two? I know him right well, and many think that he is one of the stoutest men hereabouts. He may be the stoutest of men hereabouts, quoth Guy of Gisbourne, yet I tell thee, fellow, this sty of yours is not the wide world. I lay my life upon it I am the better man of the two. He an outlaw, forsooth? Why, I hear that he hath never let blood in all his life, saving when he first came to the forest. Some call him a great archer, marry. I would not be afraid to stand against him all the days of the year with a bow in my hand. Why, truly, some folk do call him a great archer, said Robin Hood, but we of Nottinghamshire are famous hands with the longbow. Even I, though but a simple hand at the craft, would not fear to try a bout with thee. At these words Guy of Gisbourne looked upon Robin with wondering eyes, and then gave another roar of laughter till the woods rang. Now, quoth he, thou art a bold fellow to talk to me in this way. I like thy spirit in so speaking up to me, for few men have dared to do so. Put up a garland, lad, and I will try a bout with thee. Tut, tut, quoth Robin, only babes shoot at garlands hereabouts. I will put up a good Nottingham mark for thee. So saying, he arose, and going to a hazel thicket not far off, he cut a wand about twice the thickness of a man's thumb. From this he peeled the bark, and sharpening the point, stuck it up in the ground in front of a great oak tree. Thence he measured off 80 paces, which brought him beside the tree where the other sat. There, quoth he, is the kind of mark that Nottingham yeomen shoot at. Now let me see thee split that wand if thou art an archer. Then Guy of Gisbourne arose. Now out upon it, cried he, the devil himself could not hit such a mark as that. Mayhap he could, and mayhap he could not, quoth merry Robin, but that we shall never know till thou hast shot thereat. At these words Guy of Gisbourne looked upon Robin with knit brows, but as the yeoman still looked innocent of any ill meaning, he bottled his words and strung his bow in silence. Twice he shot, but neither time did he hit the wand, missing it the first time by a span and the second time by a good palm's breadth. Robin laughed and laughed. I see now, quoth he, that the devil himself could not hit that mark. Good fellow, if thou art no better with the broadsword than thou art with the bow and arrow, thou wilt never overcome Robin Hood. At these words Guy of Gisbourne glared savagely upon Robin. Quoth he, thou hast a merry tongue, thou villain, but take care that thou makest not too free with it, or I may cut it out from thy throat for thee. Robin Hood strung his bow and took his place with never a word, albeit his heartstrings quivered with anger and loathing. Twice he shot, the first time hitting within an inch of the wand, the second time splitting it fairly in the middle. Then, without giving the other a chance for speech, he flung his bow upon the ground. There, thou bloody villain, cried he fiercely, let that show thee how little thou knowest of manly sports. And now look thy last upon the daylight, for the good earth hath been befouled long enough by thee, thou vile beast. This day, Our Lady willing, thou deest I am Robin Hood. So saying, he flashed forth his bright sword in the sunlight. For a time Guy of Gisbourne stared upon Robin as though bereft of wits, but his wonder quickly passed to a wild rage. Art thou indeed Robin Hood? Cried he. Now I am glad to meet thee, thou poor wretch. Shrive thyself, for thou wilt have no time for shriving when I am done with thee. So saying, he also drew his sword. And now came the fiercest fight that ever Sherwood saw, for each man knew that either he or the other must die, and that no mercy was to be had in this battle. Up and down they fought, till all the sweet green grass was crushed and ground beneath the trampling of their heels. More than once the point of Robin Hood's sword felt the softness of flesh, and presently the ground began to be sprinkled with bright red drops, albeit not one of them came from Robin's veins. At last Guy of Gisbourne made a fierce and deadly thrust at Robin Hood, from which he leaped back lightly, but in so leaping he caught his heel in a root and fell heavily upon his back. "Now, Holy Mary aid me," muttered he, as the other leaped at him, with a grin of rage upon his face. Fiercely Guy of Gisbourne stabbed at the other with his great sword, but Robin caught the blade in his naked hand, and though it cut his palm, he turned the point away so that it plunged deep into the ground close beside him. Then, ere a blow could be struck again, he leaped to his feet, with his good sword in his hand. And now despair fell upon Guy of Gisbourne's heart in a black cloud, and he looked around him wildly, like a wounded hawk. Seeing that his strength was going from him, Robin leaped forward and, quick as a flash, struck a backhanded blow beneath the sword arm. Down fell the sword from Guy of Gisbourne's grasp, and back he staggered at the stroke, and ere he could regain himself, Robin's sword passed through and through his body. Round he spun upon his heel, and flinging his hands aloft with a shrill, wild cry, fell prone upon his face upon the green sod. Then Robin Hood wiped his sword and thrust it back into the scabbard, and coming to where Guy of Gisbourne lay, he stood over him with folded arms, talking to himself the while. "This is the first man I have slain since I shot the king's forester in the hot days of my youth. I ofttimes think bitterly, even yet, of that first life I took, but of this I am as glad as though I had slain a wild boar that laid waste a fair country. Since the Sheriff of Nottingham hath sent such a one as this against me, I will put on the fellow's garb and go forth to see whether I may not find his worship, and perchance pay him back some of the debt I owe him upon this score." So saying, Robin Hood stripped the hairy garments from off the dead man, and put them on himself, all bloody as they were. Then, strapping the other's sword and dagger around his body and carrying his own in his hand, together with the two bows of yew, he drew the cowl of horse's hide over his face, so that none could tell who he was, and set forth from the forest, turning his steps toward the eastward and Nottingham town. As he strode along the country roads, men, women, and children hid away from him, for the terror of Guy of Gisbourne's name and of his doings had spread far and near. And now let us see what befell Little John while these things were happening. Little John walked on his way through the forest paths until he had come to the outskirts of the woodlands, where, here and there, fields of barley, corn, or green meadow lands lay smiling in the sun. So he came to the highroad, and to where a little thatched cottage stood back of a cluster of twisted crab trees, with flowers in front of it. Here he stopped of a sudden, for he thought that he heard the sound of someone in sorrow. He listened, and found that it came from the cottage, so turning his footsteps thither, he pushed open the wicket and entered the place. There he saw a gray-haired dame sitting beside a cold hearthstone, rocking herself to and fro and weeping bitterly. Now Little John had a tender heart for the sorrows of other folk, so coming to the old woman and patting her kindly upon the shoulder, he spoke comforting words to her, bidding her cheer up and tell him her troubles, for that mayhap he might do something to ease them. At all this the good dame shook her head, but all the same his kind words did soothe her somewhat, so after a while she told him all that bore upon her mind. That morning she had 3 as fair, tall sons beside her as one could find in all Nottinghamshire, but that they were now taken from her, and were like to be hanged straightway. That, want having come upon them, her eldest boy had gone out, the night before, into the forest, and had slain a hind in the moonlight. That the king's rangers had followed the blood upon the grass until they had come to her cottage, and had there found the deer's meat in the cupboard. That, as neither of the younger sons would betray their brother, the foresters had taken all 3 away, in spite of the oldest saying that he alone had slain the deer. That, as they went, she had heard the rangers talking among themselves, saying that the sheriff had sworn that he would put a check upon the great slaughter of deer that had been going on of late, by hanging the very first rogue caught thereat upon the nearest tree, and that they would take the 3 youths to the King's Head Inn, near Nottingham town, where the sheriff was abiding that day, there to await the return of a certain fellow he had sent into Sherwood to seek for Robin Hood. To all this Little John listened, shaking his head sadly now and then. "Alas," quoth he, when the good dame had finished her speech, "this is indeed an ill case. But who is this that goeth into Sherwood after Robin Hood, and why doth he go to seek him? But no matter for that now, only that I would that Robin Hood were here to advise us. Nevertheless, no time may be lost in sending for him at this hour, if we would save the lives of thy 3 sons." Tell me, hast thou any clothes hereabouts that I may put on in place of these of Lincoln green? Marry, if our stout sheriff catcheth me without disguise, I am like to be run up more quickly than thy sons, let me tell thee, dame. Then the old woman told him that she had in the house some of the clothes of her good husband, who had died only 2 years before. These she brought to Little John, who, doffing his garb of Lincoln green, put them on in its stead. Then, making a wig and false beard of uncarded wool, he covered his own brown hair and beard, and, putting on a great tall hat that had belonged to the old peasant, he took his staff in one hand and his bow in the other, and set forth with all speed to where the sheriff had taken up his inn. A mile or more from Nottingham town, and not far from the southern borders of Sherwood Forest, stood the cozy inn bearing the sign of the King's Head. Here was a great bustle and stir on this bright morning, for the sheriff and a score of his men had come to stop there and await Guy of Gisbourne's return from the forest. Great hiss and fuss of cooking was going on in the kitchen, and great rapping and tapping of wine kegs and beer barrels was going on in the cellar. The sheriff sat within, feasting merrily of the best the place afforded, and the sheriff's men sat upon the bench before the door, quaffing ale, or lay beneath the shade of the broad-spreading oak trees, talking and jesting and laughing. All around stood the horses of the band, with a great noise of stamping feet and a great switching of tails. To this inn came the king's rangers, driving the widow's 3 sons before them. The hands of the 3 youths were tied tightly behind their backs, and a cord from neck to neck fastened them all together. So they were marched to the room where the sheriff sat at meat, and stood trembling before him as he scowled sternly upon them. So, quoth he, in a great, loud, angry voice, ye have been poaching upon the king's deer, have you? Now I will make short work of you this day, for I will hang up all 3 of you as a farmer would hang up 3 crows to scare others of the kind from the field. Our fair county of Nottingham hath been too long a breeding place for such naughty knaves as ye are. I have put up with these things for many years, but now I will stamp them out once for all, and with you I will begin. Then one of the poor fellows opened his mouth to speak, but the sheriff roared at him in a loud voice to be silent, and bade the rangers to take them away till he had done his eating and could attend to the matters concerning them. So the 3 poor youths were marched outside, where they stood with bowed heads and despairing hearts, till after a while the sheriff came forth. Then he called his men about him, and quoth he, These 3 villains shall be hanged straightway, but not here, lest they breed ill luck to this goodly inn. We will take them over yonder to that belt of woodlands, for I would fain hang them upon the very trees of Sherwood itself, to show those vile outlaws therein what they may expect of me if I ever have the good luck to lay hands upon them. So saying, he mounted his horse, as did his men-at-arms likewise, and all together they set forth for the belt of woodlands he had spoken of, the poor youths walking in their midst guarded by the rangers. So they came at last to the spot, and here nooses were fastened around the necks of the 3, and the ends of the cords flung over the branch of a great oak tree that stood there. Then the 3 youths fell upon their knees and loudly besought mercy of the sheriff, but the Sheriff of Nottingham laughed scornfully. Now, quoth he, I would that I had a priest here to shrive you. But, as none is nigh, you must e'en travel your road with all your sins packed upon your backs, and trust to St. Peter to let you in through the gates of paradise like 3 peddlers into the town. In the meantime, while all this had been going forward, an old man had drawn near and stood leaning on his staff, looking on. His hair and beard were all curly and white, and across his back was a bow of yew that looked much too strong for him to draw. As the sheriff looked around ere he ordered his men to string the 3 youths up to the oak tree, his eyes fell upon this strange old man. Then his worship beckoned to him, saying, Come hither, father, I have a few words to say to thee. So Little John, for it was none other than he, came forward, and the sheriff looked upon him, thinking that there was something strangely familiar in the face before him. How now, said he, methinks I have seen thee before. What may thy name be, father? Please your worship, said Little John, in a cracked voice like that of an old man, my name is Giles Hobble, at your worship's service. Giles Hobble, muttered the sheriff to himself, turning over the names that he had in his mind to try to find one to fit to this. I remember not thy name, said he at last, but it matters not. Haste thou a mind to earn 6pence this bright morn. Ay, marry, quoth Little John, for money is not so plenty with me that I should cast 6pence away and I could earn it by an honest turn. What is it your worship would have me do? Why this, said the sheriff. Here are 3 men that need hanging as badly as any e'er I saw. If thou wilt string them up, I will pay thee 2 pence apiece for them. I like not that my men-at-arms should turn hangmen. Wilt thou try thy hand?" "In sooth," said Little John, still in the old man's voice, "I ha never done such a thing before, but in a 6 pence is to be earned so easily I might as well ha it as anybody. But your worship, are these naughty fellows shrived?" "Nay," said the sheriff, laughing, "never a whit, but thou mayst turn thy hand to that also if thou art so minded. But hasten, I prithee, for I would get back to mine in betimes." So Little John came to where the 3 youths stood trembling, and putting his face to the first fellow's cheek as though he were listening to him, he whispered softly into his ear, "Stand still, brother, when thou feelest thy bonds cut. But when thou seest me throw my woolen wig and beard from my head and face, cast the noose from thy neck and run for the woodlands." Then he slyly cut the cord that bound the youth's hands, who, upon his part, stood still as though he were yet bound. Then he went to the second fellow, and spoke to him in the same way, and also cut his bonds. This he did to the third likewise, but all so slyly that the sheriff, who sat upon his horse laughing, wotted not what was being done, nor his men either. Then Little John turned to the sheriff. "Please your worship," said he, "will you give me leave to string my bow? For I would fain help these fellows along the way when they are swinging with an arrow beneath the ribs." "With all my heart," said the sheriff, "only, as I said before, make thou haste in thy doings." Little John put the tip of his bow to his instep, and strung the weapon so deftly that all wondered to see an old man so strong. Next he drew a good smooth arrow from his quiver and fitted it to the string. Then, looking all around to see that the way was clear behind him, he suddenly cast away the wool from his head and face, shouting in a mighty voice, "Run!" Quick as a flash, the 3 youths flung the nooses from their necks and sped across the open to the woodlands as the arrow speeds from the bow. Little John also flew toward the covert like a greyhound, while the sheriff and his men gazed after him, all bewildered with the sudden doing. But ere the yeoman had gone far, the sheriff roused himself. "After him!" he roared in a mighty voice, for he knew now who it was with whom he had been talking, and wondered that he had not known him before. Little John heard the sheriff's words, and seeing that he could not hope to reach the woodlands before they would be upon him, he stopped and turned suddenly, holding his bow as though he were about to shoot. "Stand back," cried he fiercely. "The first man that cometh a foot forward or toucheth finger to bowstring dieth." At these words the sheriff's men stood as still as stocks, for they knew right well that Little John would be as good as his word, and that to disobey him meant death. In vain the sheriff roared at them, calling them cowards and urging them forward in a body. They would not budge an inch, but stood and watched Little John as he moved slowly away toward the forest, keeping his gaze fixed upon them. But when the sheriff saw his enemy thus slipping betwixt his fingers, he grew mad with his rage so that his head swam, and he knew not what he did. Then of a sudden he turned his horse's head, and plunging his spurs into its sides, he gave a great shout, and, rising in his stirrups, came down upon Little John like the wind. Then Little John raised his deadly bow and drew the gray goose feather to his cheek. But alas for him! For ere he could loose the shaft, the good bow that had served him so long split in his hands, and the arrow fell harmless at his feet. Seeing what had happened, the sheriff's men raised a shout, and, following their master, came rushing down upon Little John. But the sheriff was ahead of the others, and so caught up with the yeoman before he reached the shelter of the woodlands. Then leaning forward he struck a mighty blow. Little John ducked, and the sheriff's sword turned in his hand, but the flat of the blade struck the other upon the head and smote him down, stunned and senseless. "Now I am right glad," said the sheriff, when the men came up and found that Little John was not dead, "that I have not slain this man in my haste. I would rather lose 500 pounds than have him die thus instead of hanging, as such a vile thief should do. Go, get some water from yonder fountain, William, and pour it over his head." The man did as he was bidden, and presently Little John opened his eyes and looked around him, all dazed and bewildered with the stun of the blow. Then they tied his hands behind him, and lifting him up set him upon the back of one of the horses, with his face to its tail and his feet strapped beneath its belly. So they took him back to the King's Head Inn, laughing and rejoicing as they went along. But in the meantime the widow's 3 sons had gotten safely away, and were hidden in the woodlands. Once more the Sheriff of Nottingham sat within the King's Head Inn. His heart rejoiced within him, for he had at last done that which he had sought to do for years, taken Little John prisoner. Quoth he to himself, "This time tomorrow the rogue shall hang upon the gallows tree in front of the great gate of Nottingham town, and thus shall I make my long score with him even." So saying, he took a deep draught of canary. But it seemed as if the sheriff had swallowed a thought with his wine, for he shook his head and put the cup down hastily. "Now," he muttered to himself, "I would not for £1,000 have this fellow slip through my fingers. Yet, should his master escape that foul Guy of Gisbourne, there is no knowing what he may do, for he is the cunningest knave in all the world, this same Robin Hood. Belike I had better not wait until tomorrow to hang the fellow." So saying, he pushed his chair back hastily, and going forth from the inn called his men together. Quoth he, "I will wait no longer for the hanging of this rogue, but it shall be done forthwith, and that from the very tree whence he saved those 3 young villains by stepping betwixt them and the law. So get ye ready straightway." Then once more they sat Little John upon the horse, with his face to the tail, and so, one leading the horse whereon he sat and the others riding around him, they went forward to that tree from the branches of which they had thought to hang the poachers. On they went, rattling and jingling along the road till they came to the tree. Here one of the men spake to the sheriff of a sudden. "Your worship," cried he, "is not yon fellow coming along toward us that same Guy of Gisbourne whom thou didst send into the forest to seek Robin Hood?" At these words the sheriff shaded his eyes and looked eagerly. "Why, certes," quoth he, "yon fellow is the same. Now heaven send that he hath slain the master thief, as we will presently slay the man." When Little John heard this speech he looked up, and straightway his heart crumbled away within him. For not only were the man's garments all covered with blood, but he wore Robin Hood's bugle horn and carried his bow and broadsword. "How now?" cried the sheriff, when Robin Hood in Guy of Gisbourne's clothes had come nigh to them. "What luck hath befallen thee in the forest? Why, man, thy clothes are all over blood." "And thou likest not my clothes," said Robin in a harsh voice like that of Guy of Gisbourne. "Thou mayst shut thine eyes. Marry, the blood upon me is that of the vilest outlaw that ever trod the woodlands, and one whom I have slain this day, albeit not without wound to myself." Then out spake Little John, for the first time since he had fallen into the sheriff's hands. "O thou vile, bloody wretch, I know thee, Guy of Gisbourne, for who is there that hath not heard of thee and cursed thee for thy vile deeds of blood and rapine? Is it by such a hand as thine that the gentlest heart that ever beat is stilled in death? Truly, thou art a fit tool for this coward Sheriff of Nottingham. Now I die joyfully, nor do I care how I die, for life is naught to me." So spake Little John, the salt tears rolling down his brown cheeks. But the Sheriff of Nottingham clapped his hands for joy. "Now, Guy of Gisbourne," cried he, "if what thou tellest me is true, it will be the best day's doings for thee that ever thou hast done in all thy life." "What I have told thee is sooth, and I lie not," said Robin, still in Guy of Gisbourne's voice. "Look, is not this Robin Hood's sword, and is not this his good bow of yew, and is not this his bugle horn? Thinkest thou he would have given them to Guy of Gisbourne of his own free will?" Then the sheriff laughed aloud for joy. "This is a good day," cried he, "the great outlaw dead and his right-hand man in my hands. Ask what thou wilt of me, Guy of Gisbourne, and it is thine." "Then this I ask of thee," said Robin. "As I have slain the master, I would now kill the man. Give this fellow's life into my hands, Sir Sheriff." "Now thou art a fool," cried the sheriff. "Thou mightst have had money enough for a night's ransom if thou hadst asked for it. I like ill to let this fellow pass from my hands, but as I have promised, thou shalt have him." "I thank thee right heartily for thy gift," cried Robin. "Take the rogue down from the horse, men, and lean him against yonder tree, while I show you how we stick a porker whence I come." At these words some of the sheriff's men shook their heads, for though they cared not a whit whether Little John were hanged or not, they hated to see him butchered in cold blood. But the sheriff called to them in a loud voice, ordering them to take the yeoman down from the horse and lean him against the tree, as the other bade. While they were doing this, Robin Hood strung both his bow and that of Guy of Gisbourne, albeit none of them took notice of his doing so. Then, when Little John stood against the tree, he drew Guy of Gisbourne's sharp, double-edged dagger. Fall back," cried he. "Would ye crowd so on my pleasure, ye unmannerly knaves? Back, I say, farther yet." So they crowded back, as he ordered, many of them turning their faces away, that they might not see what was about to happen. "Come," cried Little John, "here is my breast. It is meet that the same hand that slew my dear master should butcher me also. I know thee, Guy of Gisbourne." "Peace, Little John," said Robin in a low voice. "Twice thou hast said thou knowest me, and yet thou knowest me not at all. Couldst thou not tell me beneath this wild beast's hide? Yonder, just in front of thee, lie my bow and arrows, likewise my broadsword. Take them when I cut thy bonds. Now get them quickly." So saying, he cut the bonds, and Little John, quick as a wink, leaped forward and caught up the bow and arrows and the broadsword. At the same time, Robin Hood threw back the cowl of horse's hide from his face and bent Guy of Gisbourne's bow, with a keen barbed arrow fitted to the string. "Stand back," cried he sternly. "The first man that toucheth finger to bowstring dieth. I have slain thy man, Sheriff. Take heed that it is not thy turn next." Then, seeing that Little John had armed himself, he clapped his bugle horn to his lips and blew 3 blasts both loud and shrill. Now when the Sheriff of Nottingham saw whose face it was beneath Guy of Gisbourne's hood, and when he heard those bugle notes ring in his ear, he felt as if his hour had come. "Robin Hood," roared he, and without another word he wheeled his horse in the road and went off in a cloud of dust. The sheriff's men, seeing their master thus fleeing for his life, thought that it was not their business to tarry longer, so, clapping spurs to their horses, they also dashed away after him. But though the Sheriff of Nottingham went fast, he could not outstrip a cloth-yard arrow. Little John twanged his bowstring with a shout, and when the sheriff dashed in through the gates of Nottingham town at full speed, a gray goose shaft stuck out behind him like a molting sparrow with one feather in its tail. For a month afterward, the poor sheriff could sit upon naught but the softest cushions that could be gotten for him. Thus the sheriff and a score of men ran away from Robin Hood and Little John, so that when Will Stutely and a dozen or more of stout yeomen burst from out the covert, they saw not of their master's enemies, for the sheriff and his men were scurrying away in the distance, hidden within a cloud of dust like a little thunderstorm. Then they all went back into the forest once more, where they found the widow's 3 sons, who ran to Little John and kissed his hands. But it would not do for them to roam the forest at large any more, so they promised that, after they had gone and told their mother of their escape, they would come that night to the greenwood tree, and thenceforth become men of the band. King Richard comes to Sherwood Forest. Not more than 2 months had passed and gone since these stirring adventures befell Robin Hood and Little John, when all Nottinghamshire was a mighty stir and tumult. For King Richard of the Lion's Heart was making a royal progress through merry England, and everyone expected him to come to Nottingham town in his journeying. Messengers went riding back and forth between the sheriff and the king, until at last the time was fixed upon when his majesty was to stop in Nottingham, as the guest of his worship. And now came more bustle than ever. A great running hither and thither, a rapping of hammers and a babble of voices sounded everywhere through the place, for the folk were building great arches across the streets, beneath which the king was to pass, and were draping these arches with silken banners and streamers of many colors. Great hubbub was going on in the guild hall of the town, also, for here a grand banquet was to be given to the king and the nobles of his train, and the best master carpenters were busy building a throne where the king and the sheriff were to sit at the head of the table, side by side. It seemed to many of the good folk of the place as if the day that should bring the king into the town would never come, but all the same it did come in its own season, and bright shone the sun down into the stony streets, which were all alive with a restless sea of people. On either side of the way great crowds of town and country folk stood packed as close together as dried herring in a box, so that the sheriff's men, halberds in hands, could hardly press them back to leave space for the king's riding. "Take care whom thou pushest against," cried a great, burly friar to one of these men. "Wouldst thou dig thine elbows into me, sirrah? By'r Lady of the Fountain, and thou dost not treat me with more deference, I will crack thy knave's pate for thee, even though thou be one of the mighty sheriff's men." At this a great shout of laughter arose from a number of tall yeomen in Lincoln Green that were scattered through the crowd thereabouts, but one that seemed of more authority than the others nudged the holy man with his elbow. "Peace, Tuck," said he. "Didst thou not promise me, ere thou camest here, that thou wouldst put a check upon thy tongue?" "Aye, marry," grumbled the other, "but I did not think to have a hard-footed knave trample all over my poor toes, as though they were no more than so many acorns in the forest." But of a sudden all this bickering ceased, for a clear sound of many bugle horns came winding down the street. Then all the people craned their necks and gazed in the direction whence the sound came, and the crowding and the pushing and the swaying grew greater than ever. And now a gallant array of men came gleaming into sight, and the cheering of the people ran down the crowd as the fire runs in dry grass. 28 heralds in velvet and cloth of gold came riding forward. Over their heads fluttered a cloud of snow-white feathers, and each herald bore in his hand a long silver trumpet, which he blew musically. From each trumpet hung a heavy banner of velvet and cloth of gold, with the royal arms of England emblazoned thereon. After these came riding 50 noble knights, 2 by 2, all fully armed, saving that their heads were uncovered. In their hands they bore tall lances, from the tops of which fluttered pennons of many colors and devices. By the side of each knight walked a page clad in rich clothes of silk and velvet, and each page bore in his hands his master's helmet, from which waved long, floating plumes of feathers. Never had Nottingham seen a fairer sight than those 50 noble knights, from whose armor the sun blazed in dazzling light as they came riding on their great war horses, with clashing of arms and jingling of chains. Behind the knights came the barons and the nobles of the mid-country, in robes of silk and cloth of gold, with golden chains about their necks and jewels at their girdles. Behind these again came a great array of men-at-arms, with spears and halberds in their hands, and in the midst of these, 2 riders side by side. One of the horsemen was the Sheriff of Nottingham in his robes of office. The other, who was a head taller than the sheriff, was clad in a rich but simple garb, with a broad, heavy chain about his neck. His hair and beard were like threads of gold, and his eyes were as blue as the summer sky. As he rode along he bowed to the right hand and the left, and a mighty roar of voices followed him as he passed, for this was King Richard. Then above all the tumult and the shouting a great voice was heard roaring, "Heaven, its saints bless thee, our gracious King Richard, and likewise Our Lady of the Fountain bless thee." Then King Richard, looking toward the spot whence the sound came, saw a tall, burly, strapping priest standing in front of all the crowd with his legs wide apart as he backed against those behind. "By my soul, Sheriff," said the king, laughing, "ye have the tallest priests in Nottinghamshire that e'er I saw in all my life. If heaven never answered prayers because of deafness, methinks I would nevertheless have blessings bestowed upon me, for that man yonder would make the great stone image of St. Peter rub its ears and hearken unto him. I would that I had an army of such as he." To this the sheriff answered never a word, but all the blood left his cheeks, and he caught at the pommel of his saddle to keep himself from falling. For he also saw the fellow that so shouted, and knew him to be Friar Tuck. And moreover, behind Friar Tuck he saw the faces of Robin Hood and Little John, and Will Scarlet, and Will Stutely and Allan a Dale, and others of the band. "How now," said the king hastily, "art thou ill, sheriff, that thou growest so white?" "Nay, your majesty," said the sheriff, "it was naught but a sudden pain that will soon pass by." Thus he spake, for he was ashamed that the king should know that Robin Hood feared him so little that he thus dared to come within the very gates of Nottingham town. Thus rode the king into Nottingham town on that bright afternoon in the early fall season. And none rejoiced more than Robin Hood and his merry men to see him come so royally unto his own. Eventide had come, the great feast in the Guildhall at Nottingham town was done, and the wine passed freely. 1,000 waxen lights gleamed along the board, at which sat lord and noble and knight and squire in goodly array. At the head of the table, upon a throne all hung with cloth of gold, sat King Richard with the Sheriff of Nottingham beside him. Quoth the king to the sheriff, laughing as he spoke, "I have heard much spoken concerning the doings of certain fellows hereabouts, one Robin Hood and his band, who are outlaws and abide in Sherwood Forest. Canst thou not tell me somewhat of them, Sir Sheriff? For I hear that thou hast had dealings with them more than once." At these words the Sheriff of Nottingham looked down gloomily, and the Bishop of Hereford, who was present, gnawed his nether lip. Quoth the sheriff, "I can tell your majesty but little concerning the doings of those naughty fellows, saving that they are the boldest lawbreakers in all the land." Then up spake young Sir Henry of the Lee, a great favourite with the king, under whom he had fought in Palestine. "May it please your majesty," said he, "when I was away in Palestine, I heard ofttimes from my father, and in most cases I heard of this very fellow, Robin Hood. If your majesty would like, I will tell you a certain adventure of this outlaw." Then the king laughingly bade him tell his tale, whereupon he told how Robin Hood had aided Sir Richard of the Lee with money that he had borrowed from the Bishop of Hereford. Again and again the king and those present roared with laughter, while the poor bishop waxed cherry red in the face with vexation, for the matter was a sore thing with him. When Sir Henry of the Lee was done, others of those present, seeing how the king enjoyed this merry tale, told other tales concerning Robin and his merry men. "By the hilt of my sword," said stout King Richard, "this is as bold and merry a knave as ever I heard tell of. Marry, I must take this matter in hand, and do what thou couldst not do, Sheriff, to wit, clear the forest of him and his band." That night the king sat in the place that was set apart for his lodging while in Nottingham town. With him were young Sir Henry of the Lee, and 2 other knights, and 3 barons of Nottinghamshire. But the king's mind still dwelled upon Robin Hood. "Now," quoth he, "I would freely give 100 pounds to meet this roguish fellow, Robin Hood, and to see somewhat of his doings in Sherwood Forest." Then up spake Sir Hubert of Gingham, laughing, "If your majesty hath such a desire upon you, it is not so hard to satisfy. If your majesty is willing to lose 100 pounds, I will engage to cause you not only to meet this fellow, but to feast with him in Sherwood." "Marry, Sir Hubert," quoth the king, "this pleaseth me well, but how wilt thou cause me to meet Robin Hood?" "Why, thus," said Sir Hubert. "Let your majesty and us here present put on the robes of 7 of the order of Black Friars, and let your majesty hang a purse of 100 pounds beneath your gown. Then let us undertake to ride from here to Mansfield town tomorrow, and, without I am much mistaken, we will both meet with Robin Hood and dine with him before the day be past." "I like thy plan, Sir Hubert," quoth the king merrily, "and tomorrow we will try it and see whether there be virtue in it." So it happened that when early the next morning the sheriff came to where his liege lord was abiding, to pay his duty to him, the king told him what they had talked of the night before, and what merry adventure they were set upon undertaking that morning. But when the sheriff heard this, he smote his forehead with his fist. "Alas," said he, "what evil counsel is this that hath been given thee? O my gracious lord and king, you know not what you do. This villain that you thus go to seek hath no reverence either for king or king's laws. But did I not hear aright, when I was told that this Robin Hood hath shed no blood since he was outlawed, saving only that of that vile Guy of Gisbourne, for whose death all honest men should thank him?" "Yea, your majesty," said the sheriff, "you have heard aright, nevertheless." "Then," quoth the king, breaking in on the sheriff's speech, "what have I to fear in meeting him, having done him no harm? Truly, there is no danger in this. But mayhap thou wilt go with us, Sir Sheriff." "Nay," quoth the sheriff hastily, "heaven forbid." But now 7 habits such as Black Friars were brought, and the king and those about him having clad themselves therein, and his majesty having hung a purse with 100 golden pounds in it beneath his robes, they all went forth and mounted the mules that had been brought to the door for them. Then the king bade the sheriff be silent as to their doings, and so they set forth upon their way. Onward they traveled, laughing and jesting, until they passed through the open country, between bare harvest fields whence the harvest had been gathered home, through scattered glades that began to thicken as they went farther along, till they came within the heavy shade of the forest itself. They traveled in the forest for several miles without meeting anyone such as they sought, until they had come to that part of the road that lay nearest to Newstead Abbey. "By the holy Saint Martin," quoth the king, "I would that I had a better head for remembering things of great need. Here have we come away and brought never so much as a drop of anything to drink with us. Now I would give 100 pounds for somewhat to quench my thirst withal." No sooner had the king so spoken, than out from the covert at the roadside stepped a tall fellow with yellow beard and hair and a pair of merry blue eyes. "Truly, holy brother," said he, laying his hand upon the king's bridle rein, "it were an unchristian thing to not give fitting answer to so fair a bargain. We keep an inn hereabouts, and for 50 pounds we will not only give thee a good draught of wine, but will give thee as noble a feast as ever thou didst tickle thy gullet withal." So saying, he put his fingers to his lips and blew a shrill whistle. Then straightway the bushes and branches on either side of the road swayed and crackled, and 80 broad-shouldered yeomen in Lincoln green burst out of the covert. "How now, fellow?" quoth the king. "Who art thou, thou naughty rogue? Hast thou no regard for such holy men as we are?" "Not a whit," quoth merry Robin Hood, for the fellow was he, "for in sooth all the holiness belonging to rich friars, such as ye are, one could drop into a thimble and the good wife would never feel it with the tip of her finger. As for my name, it is Robin Hood, and thou mayst have heard it before. Now out upon thee, quoth King Richard. Thou art a bold and naughty fellow and a lawless one withal, as I have often heard tell. Now, prithee, let me and these brethren of mine travel forward in peace and quietness. It may not be, said Robin, for it would look but ill of us to let such holy men travel onward with empty stomachs. But I doubt not that thou hast a fat purse to pay thy score at our inn, since thou offerest freely so much for a poor draught of wine. Show me thy purse, reverend brother, or I may perchance have to strip thy robes from thee to search for it myself. Nay, use no force, said the king sternly. Here is my purse, but lay not thy lawless hands upon our person. Hut, tut, quoth merry Robin, what proud words are these? Art thou the king of England to talk so to me? Here, Will, take this purse and see what there is within. Will Scarlet took the purse and counted out the money. Then Robin bade him keep 50 pounds for themselves and put 50 back into the purse. This he handed to the king. Here, brother, quoth he, take this half of thy money, and thank St. Martin, on whom thou didst call before, that thou hast fallen into the hands of such gentle rogues that they will not strip thee bare as they might do. But wilt thou not put back thy cowl? For I would fain see thy face. Nay, said the king, drawing back, I may not put back my cowl, for we 7 have vowed that we will not show our faces for 24 hours. Then keep them covered in peace, said Robin, and far be it from me to make you break your vows. So he called 7 of his yeomen, and bade them each one take a mule by the bridle. Then, turning their faces toward the depths of the woodlands, they journeyed onward until they came to the open glade and the greenwood tree. Little John, with 80 yeomen at his heels, had also gone forth that morning to wait along the roads and bring a rich guest to Sherwood Glade, if such might be his luck, for many with fat purses must travel the roads at this time, when such great doings were going on in Nottinghamshire. But though Little John and so many others were gone, Friar Tuck and 20 or more stout yeomen were seated or lying around beneath the great tree, and when Robin and the others came they leaped to their feet to meet him. By my soul, quoth merry King Richard, when he had gotten down from his mule and stood looking about him, thou hast in very truth a fine lot of young men about thee, Robin. Methinks King Richard himself would be glad of such a bodyguard. These are not all of my fellows, said Robin proudly, for 80 more of them are away on business with my good right-hand man, Little John. But, as for King Richard, I tell thee, brother, there is not a man of us all but would pour out our blood like water for him. Ye churchmen cannot rightly understand our king, but we yeomen love him right loyally for the sake of his brave doings which are so like our own. But now Friar Tuck came bustling up. Gee, ye good den, brothers, said he. I am right glad to welcome some of my cloth in this naughty place. Truly, methinks these rogues of outlaws would stand, but an ill chance were it not for the prayers of holy Tuck, who laboureth so hard for their well-being. Here he winked one eye slyly and stuck his tongue into his cheek. Who art thou, mad priest? Said the king in a serious voice, albeit he smiled beneath his cowl. At this Friar Tuck looked all around with a slow gaze. Look you now, quoth he, never let me hear you say again that I am no patient man. Here is a knave of a friar calleth me a mad priest, and yet I smite him not. My name is Friar Tuck, fellow the holy Friar Tuck. There, Tuck, said Robin, thou hast said eno. Prithee, cease thy talk and bring some wine. These reverend men are athirst, and sin, they have paid so richly for their score they must e'en have the best. Friar Tuck bridled at being so checked in his speech, nevertheless he went straightway to do Robin's bidding, so presently a great crock was brought, and wine was poured out for all the guests and for Robin Hood. Then Robin held his cup aloft. Stay, cried he, tarry in your drinking till I give you a pledge. Here is to good King Richard of great renown, and may all enemies to him be confounded. Then all drank the king's health, even the king himself. Methinks, good fellow, said he, thou hast drunk to thine own confusion. Never a whit, quoth merry Robin, for I tell thee that we of Sherwood are more loyal to our lord the king than those of thine order. We would give up our lives for his benefiting, while ye are content to lie snug in your abbeys and priories, let reign who will. At this the king laughed. Quoth he, perhaps King Richard's welfare is more to me than thou wottest of, fellow, but enough of that matter. We have paid well for our fare, so canst thou not show us some merry entertainment? I have oft heard that ye are wondrous archers. Wilt thou not show us somewhat of your skill? "With all my heart," said Robin, "we are always pleased to show our guests all the sport that is to be seen. As Gaffer Swanthold saith, 'tis a hard heart that will not give a caged starling of the best, and caged starlings ye are with us. Ho, lads, set up a garland at the end of the glade." Then, as the yeomen ran to do their master's bidding, Tuck turned to one of the mock friars. "Hearest thou our master?" quoth he, with a sly wink. "Whenever he cometh across some poor piece of wit, he straightway layeth it on the shoulders of this Gaffer Swanthold whoever he may be, so that the poor goodman goeth travelling about with all the odds and ends and tags and rags of our master's brain packed on his back." Thus spake Friar Tuck, but in a low voice so that Robin could not hear him, for he felt somewhat nettled at Robin's cutting his talk so short. In the meantime, the mark at which they were to shoot was set up at 60 paces distance. It was a garland of leaves and flowers 2 spans in width, which same was hung upon a stake in front of a broad tree trunk. "There," quoth Robin, "yon is a fair mark, lads. Each of you shoot 3 arrows thereat, and if any fellow misseth by so much as 1 arrow, he shall have a buffet of Will Scarlet's fist." "Hearken to him?" quoth Friar Tuck. "Why, master, thou dost bestow buffets from thy strapping nephew as though they were love taps from some bouncing lass. I warrant thou art safe to hit the garland thyself, or thou wouldst not be so free of his cuffing." First David of Doncaster shot, and lodged all 3 of his arrows within the garland. "Well done, David," cried Robin, "thou hast saved thine ears from a warming this day." Next Midge, the miller, shot, and he also lodged his arrows in the garland. Then followed Wat, the tinker, but alas for him, for one of his shafts missed the mark by the breadth of 2 fingers. "Come hither, fellow," said Will Scarlet, in his soft, gentle voice. "I owe thee somewhat that I would pay forthwith." Then Wat, the tinker, came forward and stood in front of Will Scarlet, screwing up his face and shutting his eyes tightly, as though he already felt his ears ringing with the buffet. Will Scarlet rolled up his sleeve, and standing on tiptoe to give the greater swing to his arm, he struck with might and main. Woof! Came his palm against the tinker's head, and down went stout Wat to the grass, heels over head, as the wooden image at the fair goes down when the skillful player throws a cudgel at it. Then, as the tinker sat up upon the grass, rubbing his ear and winking and blinking at the bright stars that danced before his eyes, the yeomen roared with mirth till the forest rang. As for King Richard, he laughed till the tears ran down his cheeks. Thus the band shot, each in turn, some getting off scot-free and some winning a buffet that always sent them to the grass. And now, last of all, Robin took his place, and all was hushed as he shot. The first shaft he shot split a piece from the stake on which the garland was hung, the second lodged within an inch of the other. "By my hollydom," said King Richard to himself, "I would give £1,000 for this fellow to be one of my guard." And now, for the 3rd time Robin shot, but alas for him! The arrow was ill-feathered, and, wavering to one side, it smote an inch outside the garland. At this a great roar went up, those of the yeomen who sat upon the grass rolling over and shouting with laughter, for never before had they seen their master so miss his mark, but Robin flung his bow upon the ground with vexation. "Now, out upon it," cried he. "That shaft had an ill feather to it, for I felt it as it left my fingers. Give me a clean arrow, and I will engage to split the wand with it." At these words the yeomen laughed louder than ever. "Nay, good uncle," said Will Scarlet in his soft, sweet voice, "thou hast had thy fair chance and hast missed thine aim out and out. I swear the arrow was as good as any that hath been loosed this day. Come hither, I owe thee somewhat, and would fain pay it." "Go, good master," roared Friar Tuck, "and may my blessing go with thee. Thou hast bestowed these love taps of Will Scarlet's with great freedom. It were pity an thou gottest not thine own share." "It may not be," said merry Robin. "I am king here, and no subject may raise hand against the king. But even our great King Richard may yield to the holy Pope without shame, and even take a tap from him by way of penance. Therefore I will yield myself to this holy friar, who seemeth to be one in authority, and will take my punishment from him." Thus saying, he turned to the king. "I prithee, brother, wilt thou take my punishing into thy holy hands?" "With all my heart," quoth merry King Richard, rising from where he was sitting. "I owe thee somewhat for having lifted a heavy weight of £50 from my purse, so make room for him on the green, lads." "And thou makest me tumble," quoth Robin. "I will freely give thee back thy £50. But I tell thee, brother, if thou makest me not feel grass all along my back, I will take every farthing thou hast for thy boastful speech." "So be it," said the king. "I am willing to venture it." Thereupon he rolled up his sleeve and showed an arm that made the yeoman stare. But Robin, with his feet wide apart, stood firmly planted, waiting the other, smiling. Then the king swung back his arm, and balancing himself a moment, he delivered a buffet at Robin that fell like a thunderbolt. Down went Robin headlong upon the grass, for the stroke would have felled a stone wall. Then how the yeomen shouted with laughter till their sides ached, for never had they seen such a buffet given in all their lives. As for Robin, he presently sat up and looked all around him, as though he had dropped from a cloud and had lit in a place he had never seen before. After a while, still gazing about him at his laughing yeoman, he put his fingertips softly to his ear and felt all around it tenderly. "Will Scarlet," said he, "count this fellow out his 50 pounds. I want nothing more either of his money or of him. Murrain seize him and his buffeting. I would that I had taken my dues from thee, for I verily believe he hath deafened mine ear from ever hearing again." Then, while gusts of laughter still broke from the band, Will Scarlet counted out the 50 pounds, and the king dropped it back into his purse again. "I give thee thanks, fellow," said he, "and if ever thou shouldst wish for another box of the ear to match the one thou hast, come to me and I will fit thee with it for naught." So spake the merry king. But even as he ended, there came suddenly the sound of many voices, and out from the covert burst Little John and 60 men, with Sir Richard of the Lee in the midst. Across the glade they came running, and as they came, Sir Richard shouted to Robin, "Make haste, dear friend, gather thy band together and come with me. King Richard left Nottingham town this very morning, and cometh to seek thee in the woodlands. I know not how he cometh, for it was but a rumor of this that reached me. Nevertheless, I know that it is the truth. Therefore hasten with all thy men, and come to Castle Lee, for there thou mayst lie hidden till thy present danger passeth. Who are these strangers that thou hast with thee?" "Why," quoth merry Robin, rising from the grass, "these are certain gentle guests that came with us from the highroad over by Newstead Abbey. I know not their names, but I have become right well acquaint with this lusty rogue's palm this morning. Marry, the pleasure of this acquaintance hath dust me a deaf ear and 50 pounds to boot." Sir Richard looked keenly at the tall friar, who, drawing himself up to his full height, looked fixedly back at the knight. Then of a sudden Sir Richard's cheeks grew pale, for he knew who it was that he looked upon. Quickly he leaped from off his horse's back and flung himself upon his knees before the other. At this, the king, seeing that Sir Richard knew him, threw back his cowl, and all the yeomen saw his face and knew him also, for there was not one of them but had been in the crowd in the good town of Nottingham, and had seen him riding side by side with the sheriff. Down they fell upon their knees, nor could they say a word. Then the king looked all around right grimly, and last of all, his glance came back and rested again upon Sir Richard of the Lee. "How is this, Sir Richard?" said he sternly. "How darest thou step between me and these fellows, and how darest thou offer thy knightly castle of the Lee for a refuge to them? Wilt thou make it a hiding place for the most renowned outlaws in England?" Then Sir Richard of the Lee raised his eyes to the king's face. "Far be it from me," said he, "to do aught that could bring your majesty's anger upon me. Yet, sooner would I face your majesty's wrath than suffer aught of harm that I could stay to fall upon Robin Hood and his band, for to them I owe life, honor, everything. Should I, then, desert him in his hour of need?" Ere the knight had done speaking, one of the mock friars that stood near the king came forward and knelt beside Sir Richard, and throwing back his cowl showed the face of young Sir Henry of the Lee. Then Sir Henry grasped his father's hand and said, "Here kneels one who hath served thee well, King Richard, and, as thou knowest, hath stepped between thee and death in Palestine. Yet do I abide by my dear father, and here I say also that I would freely give shelter to this noble outlaw, Robin Hood, even though it brought thy wrath upon me, for my father's honor and my father's welfare are as dear to me as mine own." King Richard looked from one to the other of the kneeling knights, and at last the frown faded from his brow and a smile twitched at the corners of his lips. "Marry, Sir Richard," quoth the king, "thou art a bold-spoken knight, and thy freedom of speech weigheth not heavily against thee with me. This young son of thine taketh after his sire, both in boldness of speech and of deed, for, as he saith, he stepped one time betwixt me and death. Wherefore I would pardon thee for his sake, even if thou hadst done more than thou hast. Rise all of you, for ye shall suffer no harm through me this day, for it were pity that a merry time should end in a manner as to mar its joyousness. Then all arose, and the king beckoned Robin Hood to come to him. "How now," quoth he, "is thine ear still too deaf to hear me speak?" "Mine ears would be deafened in death ere they would cease to hear your majesty's voice," said Robin. "As for the blow that your majesty struck me, I would say that though my sins are haply many, methinks they have been paid up in full thereby." "Thinkest thou so?" said the king with somewhat of sternness in his voice. "Now I tell thee that but for three things, to wit, my mercifulness, my love for a stout woodsman, and the loyalty thou hast avowed for me, thine ears, mayhap, might have been more tightly closed than ever a buffet from me could have shut them. Talk not lightly of thy sins, good Robin, but come, look up. Thy danger is past, for hereby I give thee and all thy band free pardon. But in sooth, I cannot let you roam the forest as ye have done in the past. Therefore I will take thee at thy word, when thou didst say thou wouldst give thy service to me, and thou shalt go back to London with me. We will take that bold knave Little John also, and likewise thy cousin, Will Scarlet, and thy minstrel, Allan a Dale. As for the rest of thy band, we will take their names and have them duly recorded as Royal Rangers. For methinks it were wiser to have them changed to law-abiding caretakers of our deer in Sherwood than to leave them to run at large as outlawed slayers thereof. But now get a feast ready. I would see how ye live in the woodlands." So Robin bade his men make ready a grand feast. Straightway great fires were kindled and burned brightly, at which savory things roasted sweetly. While this was going forward, the king bade Robin call Allan a Dale, for he would hear him sing. So word was passed for Allan, and presently he came, bringing his harp. "Marry," said King Richard, "if thy singing match thy looks it is fair enough. Prithee, strike up a ditty and let us have a taste of thy skill." Then Allan touched his harp lightly, and all words were hushed while he sang thus. "Oh, where hast thou been, my daughter, oh? Where hast thou been this day, daughter, my daughter? Oh, I have been to the river's side, where the waters lie all grey and wide, and the grey sky broods o'er the leaden tide, and the shrill wind sighs a-straining. What saw'st thou there, my daughter? What saw'st thou there this day, daughter, my daughter? Oh, I saw a boat come drifting nigh, where the quivering rushes hiss and sigh, and the water soughs as it gurgles by, and the shrill wind sighs a-straining. What sailed in the boat, my daughter? What sailed in the boat this day, daughter, my daughter? Oh, there was one all clad in white, and about his face hung a pallid light, and his eyes gleamed sharp like the stars at night, and the shrill wind sighed a-straining. And what said he, my daughter? What said he to thee this day, daughter, my daughter? Oh, said he not, but did he this: thrice on my lips did he press a kiss, and my heartstrings shrunk with an awful bliss, and the shrill wind sighed a-straining. Why growest thou so cold, my daughter? Why growest thou so cold and white, daughter, my daughter? Oh, never a word the daughter said, but she sat all straight with a drooping head, for her heart was stilled and her face was dead, and the shrill wind sighed a-straining. All listened in silence, and when Allan a Dale had done, King Richard heaved a sigh. "By the breath of my body, Allan," quoth he, "thou hast such a wondrous sweet voice that it strangely moves my heart. But what doleful ditty is this for the lips of a stout yeoman? I would rather hear thee sing a song of love and battle than a sad thing like that. Moreover, I understand it not. What meanest thou by the words?" "I know not, your majesty," said Allan, shaking his head, "for ofttimes I sing that which I do not clearly understand mine own self." "Well, well," quoth the king, "let it pass. Only I tell thee this, Allan, thou shouldst turn thy songs to such matters as I spoke of, to wit, love or war. For in sooth thou hast a sweeter voice than Blondel, and methought he was the best minstrel that ever I heard." But now one came forward, and said that the feast was ready. So Robin Hood brought King Richard, and those with him, to where it lay all spread out on fair white linen cloths, which lay upon the soft green grass. Then King Richard sat him down and feasted and drank, and when he was done, he swore roundly that he had never sat at such a lusty repast in all his life before. That night he lay in Sherwood Forest upon a bed of sweet green leaves, and early the next morning he set forth from the woodlands for Nottingham town, Robin Hood and all of his band going with him. You may guess what a stir there was in the good town when all these famous outlaws came marching into the streets. As for the sheriff, he knew not what to say nor where to look when he saw Robin Hood in such high favor with the king, while all his heart was filled with gall because of the vexation that lay upon him. The next day the king took leave of Nottingham town, So Robin Hood and Little John and Will Scarlet and Alan a Dale shook hands with all the rest of the band, kissing the cheeks of each man and swearing that they would often come to Sherwood and see them. Then each mounted his horse and rode away in the train of the king. Epilogue. Thus end the merry adventures of Robin Hood, for, in spite of his promise, it was many a year ere he saw Sherwood again. After a year or two at court, Little John came back to Nottinghamshire, where he lived in an orderly way, though within sight of Sherwood, and where he achieved great fame as the champion of all England with the quarterstaff. Will Scarlet, after a time, came back to his own home, whence he had been driven by his unlucky killing of his father's steward. The rest of the band did their duty as royal rangers right well. But Robin Hood and Alan a Dale did not come again to Sherwood so quickly, for thus it was. Robin, through his great fame as an archer, became a favorite with the king, so that he speedily rose in rank to be the chief of all the yeomen. At last the king, seeing how faithful and how loyal he was, created him Earl of Huntingdon. So Robin followed the king to the wars, and found his time so full that he had no chance to come back to Sherwood for even so much as a day. As for Alan a Dale and his wife, the fair Ellen, they followed Robin Hood and shared in all his ups and downs of life. And now, dear friend, you who have journeyed with me in all these merry doings, I will not bid you follow me further, but will drop your hand here with a good den, if you wish it. For that which cometh hereafter speaks of the breaking up of things, and shows how joys and pleasures that are dead and gone can never be set upon their feet to walk again. I will not dwell upon the matter overlong, but will tell as speedily as may be of how that stout fellow, Robin Hood, died as he had lived, not at court as Earl of Huntingdon, but with bow in hand, his heart in the greenwood, and he himself a right yeoman. King Richard died upon the battlefield, in such a way as properly became a lion-hearted king, as you yourself no doubt know. So, after a time, the Earl of Huntingdon, or Robin Hood, as we still call him, as of old finding nothing for his doing abroad, came back to merry England again. With him came Alan a Dale and his wife, the fair Ellen, for these two had been chief of Robin's household ever since he had left Sherwood Forest. It was in the springtime when they landed once more on the shores of England. The leaves were green, and the small birds sang blithely, just as they used to do in fair Sherwood when Robin Hood roamed the woodland shades with a free heart and a light heel. All the sweetness of the time and the joyousness of everything brought back to Robin's mind his forest life, so that a great longing came upon him to behold the woodlands once more. So he went straightway to King John and besought leave of him to visit Nottingham for a short season. The king gave him leave to come and to go, but bade him not stay longer than 3 days at Sherwood. So Robin Hood and Alan a Dale set forth without delay to Nottinghamshire and Sherwood Forest. The first night they took up their inn at Nottingham town, yet they did not go to pay their duty to the sheriff, for his worship bore many a bitter grudge against Robin Hood, which grudges had not been lessened by Robin's rise in the world. The next day, at an early hour, they mounted their horses and set forth for the woodlands. As they passed along the road, it seemed to Robin that he knew every stick and stone that his eyes looked upon. Yonder was a path that he had ofttimes trod of a mellow evening, with Little John beside him. Here was one, now nigh choked with brambles, along which he and a little band had walked when they went forth to seek a certain Curtal friar. Thus they rode slowly onward, talking about these old, familiar things, old and yet new, for they found more in them than they had ever thought of before. Thus at last they came to the open glade, and the broad, wide-spreading greenwood tree, which was their home for so many years. Neither of the two spoke when they stood beneath that tree. Robin looked all about him at the well-known things, so like what they used to be and yet so different. For, where once was the bustle of many busy fellows was now the quietness of solitude. And, as he looked, the woodlands, the greensward, and the sky all blurred together in his sight through salt tears. For such a great yearning came upon him as he looked on these things, as well known to him as the fingers of his right hand, that he could not keep back the water from his eyes. That morning he had slung his good old bugle horn over his shoulder, and now, with the yearning, came a great longing to sound his bugle once more. He raised it to his lips, he blew a blast. Tirilla, lirilla. The sweet, clear notes went winding down the forest paths, coming back again from the more distant bosky shades in faint echoes of sound, tirilla, lirilla, tirilla, lirilla, until it faded away and was lost. Now it chanced that on that very morn Little John was walking through a spur of the forest upon certain matters of business, and as he paced along, sunk in meditation, the faint, clear notes of a distant bugle horn came to his ear. As leaps the stag when it feels the arrow at its heart, so leaped Little John when that distant sound met his ear. All the blood in his body seemed to rush like a flame into his cheeks as he bent his head and listened. Again came the bugle note, thin and clear, and yet again it sounded. Then Little John gave a great, wild cry of yearning, of joy, and yet of grief, and putting down his head, he dashed into the thicket. Onward he plunged, crackling and rending, as the wild boar rushes through the underbrush. Little recked he of thorns and briars that scratched his flesh and tore his clothing, for all he thought of was to get, by the shortest way, to the greenwood glade whence he knew the sound of the bugle horn came. Out he burst from the covert, at last, a shower of little broken twigs falling about him, and without pausing a moment, rushed forward and flung himself at Robin's feet. Then he clasped his arms around the master's knees, and all his body was shaken with great sobs. Neither could Robin nor Allan a Dale speak, but stood looking down at Little John, the tears rolling down their cheeks. While they thus stood, 7 royal rangers rushed into the open glade and raised a great shout of joy at the sight of Robin, and at their head was Will Stutely. Then, after a while, came 4 more, panting with their running, and 2 of these 4 were Will Scathellock and Midge, the miller, for all of these had heard the sound of Robin Hood's horn. All these ran to Robin and kissed his hands and his clothing, with great sound of weeping. After a while Robin looked around him with tear-dimmed eyes and said, in a husky voice, "Now, I swear that never again will I leave these dear woodlands. I have been away from them and from you too long. Now do I lay by the name of Robert, Earl of Huntingdon, and take upon me once again that nobler title, Robin Hood the yeoman." At this, a great shout went up, and all the yeomen shook one another's hands for joy. The news that Robin Hood had come back again to dwell in Sherwood as of old spread like wildfire all over the countryside, so that ere a se'nnight had passed nearly all of his old yeomen had gathered about him again. But when the news of all this reached the ears of King John, he swore both loud and deep, and took a solemn vow that he would not rest until he had Robin Hood in his power, dead or alive. Now there was present at court a certain knight, Sir William Dale, as gallant a soldier as ever donned harness. Sir William Dale was well acquainted with Sherwood Forest, for he was head keeper over that part of it that lay nigh to good Mansfield town. So to him the king turned, and bade him take an army of men and go straightway to seek Robin Hood. Likewise the king gave Sir William his signet ring to show to the sheriff, that he might raise all his armed men to aid the others in their chase of Robin. So Sir William and the sheriff set forth to do the king's bidding and to search for Robin Hood. And for 7 days they hunted up and down, yet found him not. Now had Robin Hood been as peaceful as of old, everything might have ended in smoke, as other such ventures had always done before. But he had fought for years under King Richard, and was changed from what he used to be. It galled his pride to thus flee away before those sent against him, as a chased fox flees from the hounds. So thus it came about, at last, that Robin Hood and his yeomen met Sir William and the sheriff and their men in the forest, and a bloody fight followed. The first man slain in that fight was the Sheriff of Nottingham, for he fell from his horse with an arrow in his brain ere 50 of shafts had been sped. Many a better man than the sheriff kissed the sod that day, but at last, Sir William Dale being wounded and most of his men slain, he withdrew, beaten, and left the forest. But scores of good fellows were left behind him, stretched out all stiff beneath the sweet green boughs. But though Robin Hood had beaten off his enemies in fair fight, all this lay heavily upon his mind, so that he brooded over it until a fever seized upon him. For 3 days it held him, and though he strove to fight it off, he was forced to yield at last. Thus it came that, on the morning of the 4th day, he called Little John to him, and told him that he could not shake the fever from him, and that he would go to his cousin, the prioress of the nunnery near Kirklees in Yorkshire, who was a skilful leech, and he would have her open a vein in his arm and take a little blood from him, for the bettering of his health. Then he bade Little John make ready to go also, for he might perchance need aid in his journeying. So Little John and he took their leave of the others, and Robin Hood bade Will Stutely be the captain of the band until they should come back. Thus they came by easy stages and slow journeying until they reached the nunnery of Kirklees. Now Robin had done much to aid this cousin of his, for it was through King Richard's love of him that she had been made prioress of the place. but there is not in the world so easily forgot as gratitude. So, when the Prioress of Kirklees had heard how her cousin, the Earl of Huntingdon, had thrown away his earldom and gone back again to Sherwood, she was vexed to the soul, and feared lest her cousinship with him should bring the king's wrath upon her also. Thus it happened that when Robin came to her and told her how he wished her services as leech, she began plotting ill against him in her mind, thinking that by doing evil to him she might find favor with his enemies. Nevertheless, she kept this well to herself, and received Robin with seeming kindness. She led him up the winding stone stair to a room which was just beneath the eaves of a high, round tower, but she would not let Little John come with him. So the poor yeoman turned his feet away from the door of the nunnery, and left his master in the hands of the women. But though he did not come in, neither did he go far away, for he laid him down in a little glade nearby, where he could watch the place that Robin abided, like some great, faithful dog turned away from the door where his master has entered. After the women had gotten Robin Hood to the room beneath the eaves, the prioress sent all of the others away. Then, taking a little cord, she tied it tightly about Robin's arm, as though she were about to bleed him. And so she did bleed him, but the vein she opened was not one of those that lie close and blue beneath the skin. Deeper she cut than that, for she opened one of those veins through which the bright red blood runs leaping from the heart. Of this Robin knew not, for though he saw the blood flow, it did not come fast enough to make him think that there was anything ill in it. Having done this vile deed, the prioress turned and left her cousin, locking the door behind her. All that livelong day the blood ran from Robin Hood's arm, nor could he check it, though he strove in every way to do so. Again and again he called for help, but no help came, for his cousin had betrayed him, and Little John was too far away to hear his voice. So he bled and bled until he felt his strength slipping away from him. Then he arose, tottering and bearing himself up by the palms of his hands against the wall, he reached his bugle horn at last. Thrice he sounded it, but weakly and faintly, for his breath was fluttering through sickness and loss of strength. Nevertheless, Little John heard it where he lay in the glade, and, with a heart all sick with dread, he came running and leaping toward the nunnery. Loudly he knocked at the door, and in a loud voice shouted for them to let him in, but the door was of massive oak, strongly barred and studded with spikes, so they felt safe and bade Little John begone. Then Little John's heart was mad with grief and fear for his master's life. Wildly he looked about him, and his sight fell upon a heavy stone mortar, such as 3 men could not lift nowadays. Little John took 3 steps forward, and bending his back, heaved the stone mortar up from where it stood deeply rooted. Staggering under its weight, he came forward and hurled it crashing against the door. In burst the door, and away fled the frightened nuns, shrieking at his coming. Then Little John strode in, and never a word said he, but up the winding stone steps he ran till he reached the room wherein his master was. Here he found the door locked also, but putting his shoulder against it, he burst the locks as though they were made of brittle ice. There he saw his own dear master leaning against the gray stone wall, his face all white and drawn, and his head swaying to and fro with weakness. Then, with a great, wild cry of love and grief and pity, Little John leaped forward and caught Robin Hood in his arms. Up he lifted him as a mother lifts her child, and carrying him to the bed, laid him tenderly thereon. And now the prioress came in hastily, for she was frightened at what she had done, and dreaded the vengeance of Little John and the others of the band. Then she staunched the blood by cunning bandages, so that it flowed no more. All the while Little John stood grimly by, and after she had done he sternly bade her to be gone, and she obeyed, pale and trembling. Then, after she had departed, Little John spake cheering words, laughing loudly, and saying that all this was a child's fright, and that no stout yeoman would die at the loss of a few drops of blood. "Why," quoth he, "give thee a sanite, and thou wilt be roaming the woodlands as boldly as ever." But Robin shook his head and smiled faintly where he lay. "Mine own dear Little John," whispered he, "heaven bless thy kind, rough heart, but, dear friend, we will never roam the woodlands together again." "Aye, but we will," quoth Little John loudly. "I say again, I out upon it who dares say that any more harm shall come upon thee. Am I not by? Let me see who dares touch." Here he stopped of a sudden, for his words choked him. At last he said, in a deep, husky voice, "Now, if aught of harm befalls thee because of this day's doings, I swear by St. George that the red cock shall crow over the roof tree of this house, for the hot flames shall lick every crack and cranny thereof." As for these women, here he ground his teeth, it will be an ill day for them. But Robin Hood took Little John's rough, brown fist in his white hands and chid him softly in his low, weak voice, asking him since what time Little John had thought of doing harm to women, even in vengeance. Thus he talked till at last, the other promised in a choking voice that no ill should fall upon the place, no matter what happened. Then a silence fell, and Little John sat with Robin Hood's hand in his, gazing out of the open window, ever and anon swallowing a great lump that came in his throat. Meantime the sun dropped slowly to the west, till all the sky was ablaze with a red glory. Then Robin Hood, in a weak, faltering voice, bade Little John raise him that he might look out once more upon the woodlands. So the yeoman lifted him in his arms, as he bade, and Robin Hood's head lay on his friend's shoulder. Long he gazed, with a wide, lingering look, while the other sat with bowed head, the hot tears rolling one after another from his eyes and dripping upon his bosom, for he felt that the time of parting was near at hand. Then, presently, Robin Hood bade him string his stout bow for him and choose a smooth, fair arrow from his quiver. This Little John did, though without disturbing his master or rising from where he sat. Robin Hood's fingers wrapped lovingly around his good bow, and he smiled faintly when he felt it in his grasp. Then he knocked the arrow on that part of the string that the tips of his fingers knew so well. "Little John," said he, "Little John, mine own dear friend, and him I love better than all others in the world, mark, I prithee, where this arrow lodges, and there let my grave be digged. Lay me with my face toward the east, Little John, and see that my resting place be kept green, and that my weary bones be not disturbed." As he finished speaking, he raised himself of a sudden and sat upright. His old strength seemed to come back to him, and drawing the bowstring to his ear, he sped the arrow out of the open casement. As the shaft flew, his hand sank slowly with the bow till it lay across his knees, and his body likewise sank back again into Little John's loving arms, but something had sped from that body, even as the winged arrow sped from the bow. For some minutes Little John sat motionless, but presently he laid that which he held gently down. Then, folding the hands upon the breast and covering up the face, he turned upon his heel and left the room without a word or a sound. Upon the steep stairway he met the prioress and some of the chief among the sisters. To them he spoke in a deep, quivering voice, and said he, "An ye go within a score of feet of yonder room, I will tear down your rookery over your heads so that not one stone shall be left upon another. Bear my words well in mind, for I mean them." So saying, he turned and left them, and they presently saw him running rapidly across the open, through the falling of the dusk, until he was swallowed up by the forest. The early gray of the coming morn was just beginning to lighten the black sky toward the eastward when Little John and 6 more of the band came rapidly across the open toward the nunnery. They saw no one, for the sisters were all hidden away from sight, having been frightened by Little John's words. Up the stone stair they ran, and a great sound of weeping was presently heard. After a while this ceased, and then came the scuffling and shuffling of men's feet as they carried a heavy weight down the steep and winding stairs. So they went forth from the nunnery, and as they passed through the doors thereof, a great, loud sound of wailing arose from the glade that lay all dark in the dawning, as though many men, hidden in the shadows, had lifted up their voices in sorrow. Thus died Robin Hood, at Kirklees Nunnery, in fair Yorkshire, with mercy in his heart toward those that had been his undoing. For thus he showed mercy for the erring and pity for the weak through all the time of his living. His yeomen were scattered henceforth, but no great ill befell them thereafter, for a more merciful sheriff, and one who knew them not so well succeeding the one that had gone, and they being separated here and there throughout the countryside, they abided in peace and quietness, so that many lived to hand down these tales to their children and their children's children. A certain one saith that upon a stone at Kirklees is an old inscription. This I give in the ancient English in which it was written, and thus it runs. Here underneath Disladle Steen lies Robert Earl of Huntington, nee Arsier ver, as high Sae Jude and people called I am Robin Hood sick outlaws, as high and his men vil England Nidier C agent obiit 24 cal. Decembrist 1247. And now, dear friend, we also must part, for our merry journeyings have ended, and here, at the grave of Robin Hood, we turn, each going his own way.